You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, and I am very happy to welcome you to a special episode of Into the Fringe with Kamran Pasha. And he has been a guest on this show so often, he hardly needs any introduction. And so I give you Kamran Pasha. Hello.
Hey, Gil, it's a pleasure to be on here. And my greetings to the chat. I was just in there briefly to say hello to everyone. And I'm excited. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. You know, I've talked a lot about Hollywood stuff, but my heart and passion is talking about the kinds of things you talk about on this aspect of your channel and on this show, which is the metaphysical and the other reality, which to me is much more interesting than Hollywood.
Yeah. I definitely agree. It does grow tiring, all of the mudslinging and stuff like that. Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I am very curious if you can take us through an insider's knowledge of the Jinn, what they're supposed to be, and what their place is in Muslim culture.
So the word Jinn, which has translated into the Western world in a very popular way, the concept of genie, right? But the Jinn, literally in Arabic, means the hidden ones. It means that which cannot be seen, right? And so the concept of these Jinn spirits, it predates Islam. It was part of Middle Eastern culture, not just in Arabia, but throughout the Middle East. We're talking about it was part of ancient Palestine, part of the Sumerian and Babylonian cultures. They use different words for it, but the idea of invisible spirits dwelling amongst us was very much day-to-day part of those cultures. And, you know, in the Islamic world, they became Jinn. And so now what's interesting about the Jinn is that, you know, all of our cultures have paranormal stories and spirit stories, all of them. You know, you go to Ireland, there's a widespread belief in fairies to this day. Native Americans have lots of stories about shapeshifters and other spirit beings. Every culture has them, right? But in the modern world, I think we are taught that these are just silly legends and fairy tales told to children. And much of, I would suggest, Western culture, which is Western Europe and America and sort of Australia and New Zealand, the products of those cultures, the mainstream official stance is that to believe in these things it makes you a bit out there, makes you kooky. You know, it makes you someone who's living sort of a little bit in a fantasy land. That is how that part of the world sees it. But the majority of the world, which isn't that, you know, has more realistic, if you want to say. They view things to be a realistic part of culture. And in the Islamic world, the Jinn are not a fairy tale to this day. It is very much a living part of the society because it is inherent to the religion. In the Quran, the scripture of Islam, the Jinn are talked about quite a bit. There's an entire chapter named for them. And the Islamic creation story, which is parallel in many ways to the biblical story, same figures, Adam, Eve, all of that, slight differences in the story. But any Christian reading go, I recognize this, right? But they might be surprised by the Jinn part of it, which is that pre-existing Adam was another race in this world, which were called the Jinn, which are what we would call interdimensional beings that can slip out of this material reality into another dimensional reality. And that the rise of human beings essentially pushed them out of this material world, or at least it can't have a permanent foothold in it as a result of our occupying it. And so the Jinn are essentially like our cousins, but they are the predecessor race, right? The ancient ones that I think Lovecraft would have talked about, right? And many of them resent that we took this world from them and made it limited to them. And we can talk about it in the course of today of what does that mean, how is it limited, why is it limited. But in the Islamic tradition, Satan himself is a jinn. He's, most Muslims do not think he's a fallen angel. There's a minority that think that's what the Quran is actually talking about. But the Quran identifies him as a jinn who was at least dwelling amongst the angels, sort of the highest, like the king of the jinn, the most respected, and he got a place amongst the angels. And then when Adam was created, God ordered the angels to bow to Adam as a superior creation to the angels, right? And they, in the Islamic tradition, the angels are like robotic. They'll obey, and so they obeyed and they bowed. But the jinn, who have free will like we do, Satan said, Iblis was what his name in the Quranic tradition literally translates to "he who despairs." Right. So Iblis refused to bow and said, I'm superior." Because in the Islamic tradition, the three creations, angels, jinn, and humans, they have a metaphysical reality. The angels are made from light, divine light. The jinn are made from what is called smokeless fire, which is a very interesting distinction, right? And human beings are made from mud, the matter of the earth. And he said, well, this is mud. This is beneath me. You've made me from fire, right? And I'm not going to bow to this inferior creature. So the first sin is essentially racism, right? That's the first sin is bigotry, right?
Right.
And it's superiority of your own, not just, Christians talk about Satan having pride. This story is very specific. It's a sense of racial pride, right? Of racial superiority to this new form of creation. And because he refused to do it, God then expels Satan from paradise, from his place that he had amongst the angels. And now this jinn and those jinn that followed him and said, well, screw these humans, who are essentially usurpers of our reality, that they hold a very devastating hatred for human beings. So in the Islamic tradition, not all jinn are evil. Not all jinn follow Satan or Iblis. They don't. Some of them are good. Some of them said, no, I worship God and I'm going to obey. But all of them are dangerous because it's like an electric socket is dangerous if you put your finger into it, right?
Sure.
You don't want to mess with them because they're forces from another dimension. And if you interact with them, even if they are not hostile to you, just interacting with them opens you up to another level of energy that you can't necessarily handle. And as a result, Muslims in general fear the jinn. They like to, it's something that they're very much. We all have like our different like amulets and verses from the Quran in the house to keep these things out because you don't want this thing into your reality because it's dangerous and it's real. It's part of your day-to-day reality. To the effect of you can't find your keys, looked all over your house. The jinn must have taken it, right? And I've had that experience, right? Because to me, this is not a fictional story. I mean, I believe these entities. I've experienced them in my own way, which we'll talk about. But I'll give you a story. So I had a friend of mine. She was visiting. And she stayed over at my place. And the next day she was going, and she got I rent a car, and I had told her the stories that we got this jinn that my family's been dealing with, that I've been dealing with, and I'd warned her, just be careful. It likes to take things. It still does from my home, right? It likes to take things, right, and disappear them. And she thought that was very funny that I would say that, right? But it's such a silly thing to say. I said, just be careful because especially when newcomers come, especially when pretty girls come. Tends to have like this weird jealousy thing, and it just does things. She's like, "What are you talking about? You're saying crazy." I'm like, "Oh, I'm just telling you." So the next day, she's about to go. She puts her keys down. She calls somebody. She's coming over. She's getting her car. She turns back, and the keys are gone. The keys to her car that I saw her put down on the table in front of me had vanished. Right, and she's like, "I just put them there." She tells me, "I didn't take them. I didn't take them. I saw you put them there." And she's like, well, "Where the hell did the keys go?" So she spends the next half hour looking through my apartment, can't find the damn keys. Right? And I said, I think the jinn took them. Right? And she's like, oh my God. That's kind of crazy, but they're gone. And well, I said, maybe you should just talk to it. Maybe it'll return it. Right? And so she's like feeling a little silly. She goes, okay, Mr. Jinn, I really need to go. Can you kindly return my keys to me? She said that. We both looked. The keys were back on the table.
Wow.
I mean, to this day, we talk. I mean, that shattered her perception of reality, right? So that's how real these things are in Muslim culture. To the extent that I'm like warning my friends, like, just be aware of this thing, right? And it does fun stuff like during the height of the lockdowns, where I couldn't go down to my favorite store to get my favorite honey that I like for my tea. I like to put honey in my tea. I was literally like, I really wish I had that honey, and I turned and the honey was there in the middle of my table, right?
Wow.
And my mom was there. She's like, oh, that wasn't there before. I was like, yep. Well, thank you, Mr. Jinn, because that whole idea of the jinn answering your wishes, that's a real thing, right? But again, I don't control this thing, and it doesn't always do stuff that's beneficial to me, right? And so, but I live in a world where here I'm in Los Angeles, here I love the view of the ocean from my window, right?
Ooh, pine trees.
Working in Hollywood as a screenwriter, And yet this other dimensional reality is part of my actual life experience. But I can't really relate it to most people because it sounds crazy in America. Go back to Pakistan, nobody thinks it's crazy. You go to Morocco, everyone's like, don't go in that house. There's a jinn possession there. There's actually a great book that a producer approached me with, said, he was like, you got to read this book. And it's a story written by a British man who had bought a Moroccan riad, like in the 90s. He bought this Moroccan riad that he wanted to turn into like a hotel and really beautiful, like 700-year-old riad, this beautiful house. One of these 800-year-old houses in Morocco, it's stunning, right? And he bought it, and people are like, hey, you don't want to buy this one. It's got a jinn that's been living here for a couple hundred years. It's not going to want you to take this. And so he's like, these dumb brown people with their stupid myths, whatever. So he buys it and he starts renovating it. And then all this paranormal phenomenon happens. All the workers leave. They won't work there. He starts seeing things in that place. And this is a British dude who doesn't believe any of this stuff. And he was so frightened by his year-long experience of this riad and the jinn that lived there that he came back to Britain and he wrote his account in this book that became quite a well seller, right? And it's just like, here's a story from like the 1990s of a dude who didn't believe in jinn and messed with them. And then he's like, there's another reality going on here. And it's not going to leave me alone until I recognize it's real. So but much of the world lives in that reality. We in America tend to deny that reality, even when it punches us in the face.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, and no is a perfectly good answer. Yeah. If you were ready to tell us about some of your quote paranormal unquote experiences.
Share one with you right now. I'm happy to show them. I mean, this is, I've had lots of paranormal experiences. We talked about them on Maria's channel, Tiwa Telly. I hope she might be coming on later today. I would love to see her.
I hope so.
Brings that lovely feminine energy to the channel always. But yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences, but maybe I'll talk a little bit about the jinn phenomenon, right? Because I've had some interesting things. So we've always had this phenomenon in my family with this appearing, disappearing stuff happening that we're like, it's a jinn, right? But who is this jinn? That's like, my sister, my younger sister has a little bit of the sight, and she's seen it, and she saw it in the form of a scary woman, right? And it terrified her, right? And so, it was in our old place, and we bought our first house in New Jersey after living in an apartment for 30 years or 20 years as immigrants. Then we bought our American dream. We bought our first house in New Jersey. We moved there, and then this phenomenon started happening more extensively there, and people started seeing it. Not just my sister. I remember one night, she had her bedroom. I had my bedroom. I was like in my 20s, and she was like 5 years younger than me. And I heard her scream, and I ran in there, and she said there was this woman standing at the foot of my bed, right? And she described it. So okay. I was like, okay, all right. I mean, I don't doubt she saw it, but then I would have friends visiting from college, right? And they would stay there, and they'd be like, did your grandma live with you? Because there was this woman that appeared in my room last night. Is that is that your mom? Who was that, right? And so when multiple friends of mine, like white American friends who don't know any of this stuff, are like, who's the woman in your house? That's like, all right, well, the people are seeing it, right? So I believe I saw it once myself when I moved to Los Angeles. When I moved to Los Angeles, I first lived in a little tiny studio apartment in Westwood by UCLA on Frat Row, which was very loud and rowdy. And then I got my first job working in Hollywood and on the Twilight Zone with Forrest Whitaker. I was a staff writer on that show. And, it was my first job, and I'm working really late. And it was a hard show to work on. We created like 80 episodes, and every episode was new cast, right? It was an anthology show.
Anthology shows are difficult, yeah.
They're difficult. And we had to do 2.5 hours back to back with every episode. So we basically created 80 episodes in that one season. And it was hard. So I'd be working like, 60, 70, 80 hours a week there. And I'd come home exhausted. And that time when you're so tired, you can't go to sleep, right? Your body is so hyped up with adrenaline and whatever, but you won't let you sleep. So I'm like, damn it. I'm like tossing and turning in my bed, right? And all I've got on is this little night light in my, it's a studio. So the section of my apartment that's where the bed is, right? It's not even a bedroom, really. Mm-hmm. And I've got my light on there, and I'm just tossing, turning, trying to sleep. It must be like 2 a.m. or whatever. And I turn, and suddenly the light's blocked out. There's something standing in front of the light, right? And I can see it because the light is silhouetting it, right? And what I see is the outline of a woman, all in black, and the light, it's like a halo around her because she's silhouetting the light. It's a physical being that's blocking out the light, and I can see the silhouette. And I can see it's a woman because it's long flowing hair, right? And she's just standing there looking at me at the foot of my bed. And I jump up and I scream because holy crap, there's somebody in my room, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And As I'm screaming and I stare at it, I see the figure go from completely opaque to translucent. I can now still see the outline of the figure, but now I can see the nightlight through the figure, right? And then it just fades away. So I woke up pounding. I woke up, I wasn't even asleep. I just jumped up and my heart was pounding. Couldn't go back to sleep that night. And I told my sister, and she's like, "Yeah, that's the Jinn woman in our family that's been following us around." So fast forward 20 years. So that happened to me like in 2000, 2001. So last year, at the height of the lockdowns, or really it was in 2020, so it was the height of the lockdowns when things were really crazy, I became friends with a medium who, if any of you watch the TV show Holzer Files on Discovery Plus, my friend Cindy Keza, who's a medium on there, she and I become very good friends. And so, she's a really wonderful medium. I've seen her in real life. I've seen her like directly communicate with random strangers, messages from the other side that shock them and stun them, right? I've seen it with my own eyes. And so she has a friend who's an Indonesian psychic medium who is like the most popular person in Indonesia on their YouTube or their TV. She's got like a paranormal ghost hunter show in Indonesia. And Indonesia has like almost 200 million people, right? And it's primarily Muslim country. And so this friend Sarah, and she's like a huge star there. I mean, it's like I had a friend of mine who's Indonesian, found out I knew her. She's like, I mean, it's like, oh my, you know Elvis, right? I mean, you know Sarah, right? And so she introduced me to Sarah, and so we were doing this kind of YouTube thing on her channel, and Sarah came on from Indian Jakarta, and we're talking. And Sarah's thing is this: she can see other beings, and she has this weird thing. She has a brother, very sweet guy, I've met him, who is able to also see what she sees and can draw it. So she can see it with her actual eyes. He can see the same thing with his mind's eye, and he draws it, right? And so as we're talking, this episode, we're actually talking about the Jinn, what it means. And Indonesia has a very rich Jinn community. I've got some great stories from friends of mine who've interacted with Jinn in Indonesia that shattered their lack of belief when they interacted with these beings and saw them. But so as I'm talking, her brother starts drawing something as I'm talking on the screen. It's like, and then I see her talking to him and speaking in I guess Bahasa, the language, and I was like, what's happening? What are you guys doing? It's like on a live stream, right? And she goes, well, there's a woman standing behind you. She can see it, and her brother can see it too. And so he's drawing it, right? And her brother then shows me the picture and holds it up on the live stream, and it is this picture of a woman with long flowing hair, which is the outline of the woman that I saw. He then sent it to me, and I showed it to my younger sister. She's like, yep, that's her. That's her. That's the one that's been with her. I saw her when, 20 years ago and 30 years ago in the house, and she's been following us around. And so Sarah gave me some insight that confirms some stuff that the Sufi masters had told me. I have Sufi spiritual teachers. And they told me that, I was like, why do I have all this mystical stuff in my family? So they told me part one of the story, and Sarah tells me part two. Part one of the story they told me is that this, your family is very mystical. Like I say, my sisters all have weird psychic experiences. I have strange experiences. It's very much in our family. And they're like, why is that? And they said, well, it comes from your great-great-grandmother, who it turns out was in the 1800s a famous Sufi mystic healer in British colonial India. Okay? Which is interesting because there's some similar themes to Ms. Marvel, which is one of the reasons it's a good show anyway. But one of the reasons if you watch the show, it's all about this past. Her great-great-grandmother had these powers, so it was like, oh, that's my family, right? And so, but it was my great-great-grandmother was a famous Sufi healer, and people would come from all over the country, and they should heal. Like she's one of these like figures, like you come there, you have an extreme ailment that should kill you, and you leave, and you're completely healed. That kind of person, right? Mm-hmm. And so she's famous for that. And they said, as a result of her spiritual power and her interaction with the other world to heal people, that she had these Jinn around her that sort of connected to her and her lineage, and that this being that's been with my family, so that part was revealed. Your power comes from your great-great-grandmother, who was this Sufi mystic. I was like, oh, that's very interesting. And that was told me by my Sufi teachers in West Africa. Flash forward 10 years later, Sarah, who doesn't know my Sufi teachers in West Africa, didn't really know me, said she's communicating with this being that she sees standing behind me on the live stream. And she says, oh, okay, well, this woman was connected to your great-great-grandmother. Right? She doesn't know the story, right? She's like, so your great-great-grandmother had some kind of spiritual power, and this woman, as a result, was drawn to your great-great-grandmother because of her energy, and she connected to her lineage, and she's been with your family over 150 years, right? Because Jinn, they're not immortal, but they last, their lifespans are beyond ours. They can last thousands and thousands of years by our time, right? And so she's followed, and then she sort of took a liking to you when you were born. She kind of glommed onto you, right? And so she's there, and she's the one that appears to be making things appear and disappear because she likes to remind you that she's around, right? And she does this one thing which is really kind of disgusting, and I keep asking her not to do it, which is it really is disgusting. And Sarah laughed when I told her. It's like, yeah, that's her. Is that regularly when I'm eating anywhere, suddenly I will look down at my food and there's this long string of black hair that's come out of nowhere in the middle of my food. I'm like, I don't have any hair, right? Okay, I'm bald. And I was like, oh, this is so disgusting, right? It was my food. And like, I'm eating pasta. A string of black hair inside of my pasta, right? Can you please stop? And that's like her saying, oh, I'm here. I'm like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. It's disgusting. Right? I don't want to eat food with this like magical hair appearing inside of it, right? And so that is how crazy this thing can be. But I've tried to communicate with this being and basically say, look, can you give me some space? Because it's literally like my sister said, well, this being kind of likes him. Sarah said, no, she's starting to connect with you. She kind of likes you and she gets jealous when women enter your life. Like, remember my female friend and her vanishing keys and whatever? Mm-hmm. This has happened a lot. And it's just like, can you please stop? Can you just please stop? This is messing up my love life. It's really messing up my love life. But that's a fun story, but it's a real story. It's just like, I have to tell people like, there's this thing you got to deal with, right? I've got this like jealous interdimensional being that likes to mess around when pretty girls appear. And as anyone who's watched my YouTube knows, I'm very much a lover of the ladies. And so I was like, I got to deal with this nonsense. I got to deal with this nonsense whenever it happens, right?
Cameron's internet is spotty at the moment, so he shall return. And here he is.
I told you that, and this happens when I talk about her. This kind of stuff happens.
Maybe it's the Jinn. Yeah,
I'm not even joking. This kind of stuff happens. When I was on our friend Doomcock, when I started talking about the Jinn, I was phased out. I was knocked off. I couldn't log back in. So this because they're electromagnetic in our dimension, they appear as electromagnetic, and so these kinds of things happen. So please, can I just do my video? Can I just do my video? So yeah. So and people are watching like, I was listening to this guy for Hollywood stuff. And he's saying crazy things. I'm like, yeah, there's this whole other world.
We'll put $1 into the Jinn jar. Yeah. Please don't mess up with our live stream.
Yeah, it might happen. If it does, just keep going. I'll come back.
So I was curious. Do you have any stories about the Jinn as relate to your family or friends, or the Sufi master that you had on Piercing the Veil? I forget his name. Sheikh
Nurjan Miramani. It's the Naqshbandi Sheikh. I mean, I've shared with you some of my stories, right? My family. Well, let's talk about the Sufi master. Those who watched the Doomcock had a special sort of Piercing the Veil, and I was honored to come on board. I actually then became a follower of the Sheikh, and I've had lunch with him, and he's very gracious. I can text him at 2 a.m. in the morning. He'll respond within seconds, right? Really great spiritual master.
Very cool.
Very cool guy, from LA, and I was in Vancouver, but, a modern spiritual master. And so, if you go to his channel, which is the Muhammadan Way, and I think we can put a link to there. And I think our friend, Mexican Iron Man, who's in the chat, has also become part of that order, and we can put a link to it because it's a wonderful order. Where if you just want to learn about metaphysical stuff, right, about the other world, it's the only YouTube channel I know where Sufis are out there saying all this other reality, right, and just sharing.
Interesting.
And so I'll put a link in a second. But so the Naqshbandi Sufi order is a very famous order. It's very traditional, very old school, and it's all other Sufis have told me the Naqshbandi order is very famous because the Sufi masters have the ability to interact with and master the Jinn. So there are Jinn who are followers of that Sufi order and will serve it. And so there's a lot of strange miracles that will happen. Like we're talking about my random stuff, like my things appearing, disappearing, hair appearing. I mean, that's just random stuff of a being that I can't control. That does whatever it wants to do, right? But the Sufi masters can actually interact with these beings, and they can get their help in metaphysical things, And so my Sufi masters in West Africa, you know, I will call them, and they're in a village in West Africa, and they'll be like, well, that girl you met last night at the party is not good for you. And I was like, they're sitting in a village in Africa. How do they know about the girl I met at the party last night, right?
Right.
And it's just because they were able to interact with these spirit beings who communicate to them that, hey, Cameron's hanging out. I don't like her. I was like, really? You notice there's one theme in my life here. We going after girls and these spirit beings interfering. There's
definitely messing with your love life. Yeah.
Here's a theme here.
And I will shout out a hail to Don McDouglas and their Mexican Iron Man, my expert co-host and producer, has put the link there into the chat, so folks can follow up on that.
Yeah, there's no other channel like it, which just goes into the Sufi, other dimensional realities, and it's just I've never seen anything like that channel, which is really incredible because Sufis tend to be very private about these kinds of things. They don't really like talking about this stuff in public, but this master has been given permission to expound it by his teacher, saying that, look, the world needs to hear this stuff because we're entering a sort of apocalyptic era where those dimensions are colliding and people don't know what's happening, so you got to share this.
And I would like to ask you to retell the story about what he communicated to you regarding the sort of the new Tower of Babel. Sure.
Well, we talked about this, and it's these, and he has several videos on this topic. So we've talked about the concept of of the Mandela effect, where suddenly we are all having different memories of major historical events. You're in Mayan historical events, lines in movies are changing, all kinds of stuff. And people are like, that's not what happened. I know that's not, blah, blah. And like, well, of course that's what happened. And this phenomenon seems to have begun. It certainly wasn't documented before 2012. The internet was around since the 90s, right? I mean, people in America online, but no one was talking about this phenomenon that I'm aware of until 2012. Which is, of course, a very interesting year because we'd always hear 2012 is the year the Mayan calendar ends and a new era begins and all that. And so the other event that happened in 2012, which is historical, which I think is, of course, linked to the Mayan calendar and everything else, was that you had the CERN Hadron Collider in Switzerland, which is this particle accelerator, which is the most advanced particle accelerator on the world.
Did it come online in 2012?
It came online in May of 2012.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you go back, and what's fascinating is they had this particle accelerator that they was going to be able to break down subatomic particles to a whole new level that had never been done before to try to find the God particle. One of these dumb names they come up for it, right? As if God is a particle.
The boson Higgs. Yes.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. Any particle you find isn't God, right? It's just
right.
It shows you the creator.
It's a nickname, the God particle.
Yeah, exactly. But it also reflects a materialist reality that they think that's the actual basis of reality. No, that's a manifestation of what is the basis of reality, but whatever. So they were looking for that kind of stuff because that part of human hubris that we're going to break down reality and discover the truth. And
the secrets that man was not meant to know.
Correct. And if you go back and read the articles before they actually activated the Hadron Collider, scientists were interviewed and said, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. Best case scenario, we'll be able to discover all this new stuff about the fundamentals of the universe. Worst case scenario, we turn this thing on, it's going to create a singularity in a black hole that's going to suck the entire planet into a black hole and destroy us within seconds. We don't know. We're going to try it anyway. It's literally like when they did the first atom bomb test, right? At Los Alamos.
They thought it might ignite the atmosphere.
They thought it might ignite the atmosphere. There was one calculation where like the whole planet might be destroyed by this thing. We don't know. Let's do it. So I'll do it anyway. And, glad the whole planet wasn't destroyed, right? I'm glad it worked out that way. They didn't know. And so the same thing, let's try it, right? So that's the hubris of human beings, right? Let's try this. And so they did. And they're like, oh, wow, it worked. And we found some new part of subatomic, blah, 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 blah. But then right after that thing was activated, we suddenly started seeing stranger and stranger accounts of people having different memories of events and whatever. And that accelerated from 2012 into 2022 today. It's 10 years now. And the Mandela effect is accelerating. Or, it's named after this phenomenon where there's potentially hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people that have a different memory about Nelson Mandela, the great South African leader. The memory that I have very vividly is Nelson Mandela was in prison. He was released in like 1992-ish, right? He was released then. And at his release, he ended up being the catalyst.
Becoming the president of the National African Congress.
Exactly. And then as a result, apartheid was ended, and he became the first black African president of South Africa, ending that era, right? That's how I remember it. But people started noticing a few years ago that others were like, no, what are you talking about? Nelson Mandela died in prison in 1992, and his death led to rioting and breakdown of South Africa. And as a result of his martyrdom in prison, apartheid ended. Like, what? What are you talking about? That's a whole other historical narrative that I was like, what are you? This guy died in 92, and people say, I saw his funeral. They'll name, and the amazing thing is everyone claims this has the same story. They're like, Brad Pitt came to his funeral. They'll name the actors and the celebrities that came. You're like, it's the same story. You're like, what are you talking about? But it's the same consistent other reality story that people all over the planet are saying, what? Nelson Mandela, what? And so that's the phenomenon that was then called the Mandela effect, and it goes down to everything from did Vader say, Luke, I'm your father, or did he say, no, I'm your father, right? So all that stuff. Again, did Forrest Gump say, your life is like a box of chocolates, or did he say life was like a box of chocolates, which is the current reality, which I don't remember that. So we got no Mexican. What is he here? We have Jinn all around. We have Jinn all the time. I recommend this book from Amazon, Meditations That Are Effective. Okay, great. So
and he's still posting the next one.
Okay, so bringing it back to the Tower of Babel. So I am of the opinion, and I think Sheikh Mirmadi has said things to this effect as well, which is that essentially this phenomenon seems to have started in 2012 when we started messing with reality. And even sort of secular journalists, I'm finding articles now of people saying, did this Hadron Collider screw up reality? Because sort of a secular journalist that doesn't want to believe these miraculous things is like, and then the standard thing, it's Trump. They're like, look, we're in a crazy world where Trump became president and all this happened. And that can't have been the real flow of history. Something has altered us to bring us into a crazier and crazier world, right? So, but it was a serious article saying that the world we live in doesn't make sense anymore. Even if one doesn't accept the Mandela effect and different memories, blah, blah, blah. The world is becoming increasingly bizarre, right? And in ways that didn't feel that crazy before. And so the argument is that doing that. And so the concept is, the Sufis will say that was the Tower of Babel. In the Bible, you've got the story of the Tower of Babel, the hubris of human beings. They thought that they could build a tower to confront God and even fight God in heaven. And then God said, oh, you think you can do that? I'm going to now basically change reality so all of you are speaking different languages and can no longer communicate with each other, right? And so that is the biblical account of why we all speak different languages. And whether one takes that literally or not doesn't matter. It's an archetypal idea. And now we're seeing that idea manifest, in my opinion, as a Sufi, which is that this was the new Tower of Babel. We thought we could explain the mysteries of the universe. We thought we could break it down and find the God particle, which is idolatry, right? We thought we could do this. And God said, oh, you think you can break down reality? Okay, I'm not just going to change your languages. I'm going to change your individual perceptions of reality and your memories. And you're all going to be thrown into a multidimensional universe where none of you can communicate with each other because you don't even have the same memories. So it's beyond language now. We have different realities, right? And I fundamentally believe that is what happened. And so Sheikh Mirmadi on his channel talks about it, that, and he used the term the Jinn, right? And so he talks about how the Jinn, which are these interdimensional beings, which are sort of, if this phenomenon is happening, you would expect interdimensional beings to be part of that phenomenon, right? And so, because we claim that multiple dimensions are now overlapping as a result of CERN. So he said what's happened is, using Sufi Islamic terminology, the Jinn historically had the power to go back and forth in time, because they're not linear like we are. It's like in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, right? The prophets who lived in the Bajoran wormhole, whatever. They were not linear. They called us linear, right? So they existed outside of time. That's what these beings are. The difference is, prior to this event, this Tower of Babel event, the Jinn were not permitted to alter the timeline. They could only observe. They could go there.
Sort of a Jinn primary directive.
Exactly, and literally, even if they wanted to, they didn't have the power to do it. They could appear almost like in holographic form in different realities, but they can't change the flow of history. They can't go back and prevent Abraham Lincoln from being shot, right? Because they just don't have the power to break through. But now, with the CERN Hadron Collider defying God, the Sufi Sheikh will say God has now given them that power to go back and change history, to show you that you know nothing. Right, Jon Snow, you know nothing, right? That's all of us now. And so the Sufi sheikhs will say that they can alter reality in this form now. And it's affecting religion. Like, people, biblical religious Christians, look at the Bible and they're finding verses they don't remember, right? And they're finding, there's a famous verse. I knew this verse all the time, that we thought was in Isaiah, and the lion shall lie with the lamb, right? It's become parlance, right? It's not there. It's not there. If you go to Isaiah, and you go back not just to Isaiah in your current RS, Revised Standard Version translation, you go back to a book of Isaiah from the 8th century in a museum. It'll have this new verse that says the lamb shall, and the wolf shall lie with the lamb. The wolf. I heard that in my entire life.
Yeah, that's weird.
If that was in the biblical phrase, you would have heard that. There would be paintings of it. It's never been part of culture. But all Bibles have the wolf shall lie with the lamb. And then I watched incredible YouTube videos where people will present the Bible to their preacher, who's like, no, that's not right. Where'd you get this translation? Right? That can't be right. Nobody remembers this because it. So
this requires Bibles across the world to be rewritten at the same time.
No, it's because the text has been altered from the past, right? And within the Islamic tradition, one of the reasons within Islam that one of the central honors of Islam is that you have to memorize. The highest sort of people in the spiritual tradition are those that memorize the Quran. Like my aunt fully memorized the entire Quran. Like she can recite it. It takes like 6 hours to recite it from beginning to end. She knows it letter per letter, right? And so they're called hafid, which means protectors. And the idea being that if a phenomenon like that were to begin, if anyone were to try to alter the Quran, the hafid will immediately recognize it because it's memory. And so if anyone even alters a text, you'll be able to say, there's a million people that have memorized it that will say that's not there, right?
Right.
And so that is the protection that is placed, because in Islamic tradition, God knew this moment was going to come where he's going to alter history. So he's like, well, I'll protect the scripture by this memorization process, right? And so that's how it's done. But that's a real thing that I'm watching more and more. People are freaking out over, man, because their sense of reality is breaking down. They all laugh at it until you tell them, so did Forrest Gump say life was like a box of chocolates? They're like, of course not. Go back and watch it. Watch that old DVD. Forget the DVD. Go pull out their VCR of it. VHS tape and watch it. That's what he says. Well, he never said that. Doesn't even make grammatical sense. Yes, it doesn't make grammatical sense, but it's there.
I recall him saying, life is like a box of chocolates.
Because
you
he said,
never know what you're going to get.
Life is like a box. It doesn't make sense. My mama always said life was like a box of chocolates. It's grammatically false.
Right.
It's awkward. It's poorly written. But that's the official version of events, right? Because that's how the Jinn in this new Tower of Babel dimensional reality are having fun with us. Because you see, they're tricksters by nature. That's why that's why the old legend of the genie with the 3 wishes, right? It never goes the way you want. It's their nature. Even the ones that aren't what we would call evil. It's like little children with incredible power. Giving a little child a gun is dangerous. If the child's not been trained in gun safety, right? It's very dangerous. Imagine someone that has sort of the consciousness of a child with these powers. Are they going to do that? They're going to have fun with it.
Basically, it's on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our world is going to get increasingly bizarre as a result of that.
Yeah, that's a little scary.
But the idea is that this makes you now remember God, because you're like, you thought you were God. You thought you could master this universe. He'll take the whole universe away and give you an infinite number of millions of universes overlapping that don't make any sense. You thought you don't master anything.
Yeah. And this of course, to me, smacks of the Frankenstein story, about this is what happens when you try to put yourself on the same level as God.
Yeah, because it's archetypal, because there is that same thing, and it is the nature of human beings. That, going back to the story of Iblis, right? So Iblis thinks it's smarter than God, because how can you create this thing that's inferior to me and make me subservient to it, right? I know more than you do. And then in the Quranic tradition, then when God says, all right, well, get out of here. You think you're smarter than me? Get out. You're out. He's like, give me. And he literally, in the Quranic tradition, God's like, all right, well, I'm going to throw you into hell then. He's like, okay, can you give me a moment? He says, give me a reprieve. Give me a reprieve. I will show. Don't throw me in hell just yet. You can throw me in hell in the end. I can't stop it. But give me time. I will show you that these human beings are garbage. And I'll inspire within them lusts and desires and ego and hatred. And they will be worse than me. And you will see they are beneath me. So the very egocentrical I am better than God that Satan Iblis has, is what he tries to inspire within us, because that's the ultimate thing. Oh, you think you're God? And we're seeing that now on a biological level. We're seeing that now what we're doing. We're messing with DNA. We're seeing that now we're messing with sexuality in ways that our ancestors would be stunned by, using hormones and things to change genders and all these things. That's all. Hey, God, I'm smarter than you. And that will have its consequences.
We do have a question from the chat. Diego Flores says, I have a question. I have Muslim ancestry. How would I know if I may have something like a jinn interfering in my life?
Well, Diego, I know we've interacted in the past, so I'm guessing Muslim ancestry may very well be from Islamic Spain, and so you'll know, because again, you don't have to use the word jinn. If you're coming from the name, you're coming from a Latino background, right? Latin cultures, particularly South American and Mexican cultures, Central American cultures, have very much preserved a lot of the ancient indigenous wisdom, right? Which I think some of the more strict Catholic traditions wanted to suppress. But those traditions talk openly about spirits in the same way of jinn, right? And so if you're having strange phenomenon, if you probably ask your family, there's probably an ancestral story about a spirit that maybe they don't talk about as openly, because a lot of Catholic tradition has a very, even religious Catholics, especially conservative Catholics, have a very defined sense of reality. I have a friend who's a very conservative Catholic. He's an exorcist, actually, and he does exorcisms, and he believes in that anything outside of the Catholic official dogma is not true. So he does not believe in jinn. He said there's only two things: there's angels and demons, because that's what the Catechism teaches me, right? And
right.
So. And then he actually once had to interact with a boy that was possessed by a jinn, and his exorcism wouldn't work. And the jinn laughed at him through the boy, said, "That's not gonna work on me. I don't believe any of that crap." And he had to summon a Muslim exorcist from Canada to drive the thing out, because he didn't even know how to deal with it, because
sure, not in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, and it shouldn't exist in his paradigm. So to this day, he'll say, "Oh, it's just a stubborn demon." I was like, "That's a pretty stubborn demon. You told me your thing always works on demons. So why didn't this one work?" And so it's hard for his paradigm. But within the Mesoamerican and Latin American tradition, there's still a lot of indigenous wisdom. I would suggest, Diego, reading the books of Carlos Castaneda, right? Which I know you're familiar with, Gil. Actually, I'm going to blank my screen for 1 second. I'm going to
sure.
go get the. Hold on.
Absolutely. Hey, we've got a mod. Thanks for showing up, Canadian Spider-Man.
Okay, so this is the book. I just didn't want you to see me in my pajamas, whatever. So okay. So this is the book. So Carlos Castaneda. He has many books. This is actually, I believe, his third or his fourth book, Journey to Ixtlan. I suggest people should start with this one if you're not familiar with Castaneda. So Castaneda was an anthropologist in the 60s, and he was doing sort of his master's or PhD thesis on Mesoamerican indigenous religious spiritual beliefs. And one day he claims to encounter this guy in a bus stop, a Native American guy or native sort of Mesoamerican native guy who he calls Don Juan, who then introduces him to this whole other reality of Mesoamerican. He's a Yaqui Indian and Mesoamerican ancient mysticism, and basically takes him down this path for many years, where he experiences all this phenomenon that he thought was just fairy tales that he was writing about as an anthropologist, and then he'll take him to other dimensions where he sees other universes, and sometimes through the use of what we would call hallucinogenics, but peyote and psychedelics, and sometimes purely through meditation, and through not even meditation, he'll touch him, and the guy will be in another universe, and he describes it. And so these books were incredibly popular in the 60s, 70s. You can imagine the 60s, or whole psychedelic other world talking about. But Castaneda, a Sufi master that I know, Turkish Sufi master, said this to me 15 years ago. He said, if you ever want to understand the hidden world, the ghaib as we call it, the invisible world of the Sufis and of Islam, read the Castaneda books. He said that is the most accurate representation of the hidden world, because he said everything that I read in Castaneda is stuff that I've seen with my own eyes in the other world as a Sufi, right? And he's not making stuff up. He said that guy, because some people say there was no Don Juan, he made it all up, that it's just a fiction. I said, no, he said, the stuff that he talks about, people don't know about. I've been in those dimensions. I've interacted with those beings that he describes. Nobody knows about that, except the Mesoamericans know about it. And they've kept it secretly hidden because it didn't fit in Catholic dogma when Catholicism became the state religion, right? And so they had to keep it hidden. So Diego, going back full circle, I would suggest that the very fact that you've been asking me this question tells me that there's something behind the question. which means you had experiences or have heard of experiences in your family that don't fit into a paradigm that maybe you're always comfortable with. Ask around. I think you'll find out. And the reason I bring again this book, so I have a close friend of mine who is a Native American from Arizona, New Mexico area, right? And so I recommended this book to her. And then a year later, she sent me a text saying, "Why did you recommend I read that book?" I said, "I just thought you, as Native American from this area where Don Juan came from, might be interested in this interesting stuff. You don't know anything about it, right?" She didn't. She was really disconnected from that part of her heritage. And she said, "What happened is this." So I had the book. I read it. She said, "I read the book. It was very fascinating." I was like, "Wow, I didn't know any of this stuff." And she said, "I had the book lying around in my house, and my dad came to visit, and he saw the book. He said, 'Who gave that to you?' She said, 'Oh, my friend Cameron.' He's like, 'All right, well, now you're ready.' She said, 'What are you talking about?' She said, 'Oh, we're part of that Yaqui tradition. I just didn't tell you because you weren't open to it. But when I saw the book, I can now impart to you the same mystical truths of Don Juan that have been part of my family lineage, but you didn't believe them before, so you weren't ready to accept. When I saw the book, that was a sign that you're now ready to receive it.' Part of her family lineage, she didn't even know. But I was obviously inspired by those beings from that thing to open her heart to it. I didn't know.
You did a little kind of black magic of your own there.
No, I wouldn't call it black magic, but I was being used by these entities, I'm sure, that inspired me to say, hey, she needs to read this thing, man, because now she's on her own mystical path, and who knows what she's being taught.
Right. Yeah. Along with the Jinn, some common Muslim beliefs include witchcraft, the evil eye, talismans, displaying Quranic verses, traditional religious healers, and exorcisms. How pervasive are these in traditional Muslim culture, and what can you tell us about them?
Well, it's very pervasive. The idea of the evil eye is in the Quran. It's called the Ain, which means the eye, right? And the idea that other people looking at you with negative intentions and focusing that through the power of their eyes can have an actual practical real effect on your life. It's like an energetic dagger into your life, and can mess up not just you physically, can mess up your life stream and screw around with your life, right? And that's the Quran. The second to last chapter of the Quran has a prayer where you ask God to protect you from the darkness when it comes to the idea that there is an energetic reality to the night and to darkness that is not just it's scary because we can't see, but there's a phenomenon that's unleashed there that's metaphysical. To ask protection from that, ask protection from the evil of of witches, of sorcerers. It actually talks about those that blow upon knots. If any of you are familiar with old magical traditions, especially old witch traditions, the idea of doing a prayer on a knot and blowing on it. That's an old phenomenon throughout the world. It existed in the Prophet's days. There was a black magic attack on the Prophet Muhammad's life where someone used that kind of thing. That's where this surah was revealed to protect him from it. And then it also talks about protection from the envier when they envy, which is the ayn, which is the evil eye. Because the evil eye comes from jealousy. And remember, that is the first evil. In the Islamic tradition, Satan's first sin is jealousy of human beings. So that is the origin of evil, is jealousy. So when Satan looked upon human beings, he looked upon them with jealousy. So the evil eye originates from the very first sin, right? And so it is widespread belief. Even if you're not particularly religious, you'll see people throughout the Islamic world will have this. I probably have one I can show you in a second. I have multiple in my house. They're hanging in my door, right? But they're the khamsa, which is a symbol of the hand. Which is, again, pre-Islamic, just like the idea of jinn is pre-Islamic. The idea of the hand as a symbol against the evil eye has been discovered not just in the Middle East, but in North Africa, going back thousands of years. Judaism had it. You'll see these amulets. When I went to visit Israel and Palestine, I actually bought from a close friend of mine who's Jewish. I bought her this beautiful khamsa, which is with Hebrew prayers on it, and an eye of protection, and they call it the eye of Miriam, right? That's the eye in the middle of the hand that protects you. And in Islam, it's called the eye of Fatima. But the idea is the sacred feminine is protecting you from the evil of the evil eye. And you'll see those khamsas everywhere. I mean, people have them in our house. Like I got 3 hanging there by my door right now, and those are
beautiful. I mean, there's like stained glass, very ornate versions of it.
Let me see. I'm going to take off. I want you to see my pajamas. I'll be back in a second. Let's take one down from my wall shot. Hold on.
Sure. And Sherry says, my grandmother used to do the prayer and the knot. This is an interesting question from Adventure Industries. Do you feel that the evil eye could work over a webcam? I think somebody saw something behind Cameron on the webcam, right?
The evil eye absolutely works. In fact, my Sufi masters, one of the reasons I've been a little reluctant to be on YouTube is my Sufi masters like, dude, you're bringing a lot of evil eye upon you. There's a lot of people that don't like what you're saying. They don't like your beliefs. They don't like your politics. And they don't like your appreciation of this or that TV show or whatever. And they send you bad thoughts because you're putting yourself out there to tens of thousands, potentially millions of people on YouTube. And there's people that will screw this guy, and they're actually sending you evil eye. So one of the reasons I've recently taken a break was not just practical things. I have a lot of going on in my career. There's also been a lot of energetic disruption in my life from putting myself out there. But this is one of the things so I have an example. So this is an interesting one. So this is from Jerusalem. And
here, let me make you big here.
So I'll give you so here's a Hamsa. So you'll see the design, which is 5 fingers. So, there's, I guess, 2 thumbs, but the idea is 2 fingers here, 1, 2, 3 fingers, and they're always intricately designed. Often you'll have an eye in there. So in this one is unique. It's from one of my Sufi teachers, from my Sufi order in Jerusalem. And so in the center of it, in where you see the eye, you see there's the eye. Eye, right? So in center, you'll see a some calligraphy. That's actually Allah, God. So in the center of the eye is God, is the ultimate protection. So the word God is written in Arabic in the center of the eye. And it just so happens that there's a picture of a person underneath. This was one of my great Sufi masters who was the Imam of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, who was part of a Sufi lineage, who initiated me into his order. Sidi Muhammad al-Jamal, he passed away a few years ago here in the U.S., and he's buried. I went to visit his grave on the Mount of Olives. And so this was, my Sufi order gave this out to have his personal spiritual protection. And he's a very interesting person. I wasn't very involved in that Sufi order actually until after he passed. I went to Jerusalem and became very involved. But it was interesting, even though I wasn't particularly involved, after I had joined that order, he started appearing to me in dreams, and which was startling to me because like I said, I wasn't particularly active in that group. And yet he appeared to me in dreams while he was alive. And once he appeared, and he took me to his office in Jerusalem. And I'd never been there, and I woke up from it, and I emailed some people in the order, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you described his office exactly. That's his office." Wow. I was taken there, right? And then when I went to Jerusalem, his office is on the Haram, which our Jewish friends will call the Temple Mount, but his office is there, and I've
been there.
Yeah, so with the Haram. So it's his office. It's actually the same office that belonged to El Ghazali, who is considered the greatest Sufi scholar of all time, the 12th century. So he inherited his office over the 1,000 years later. That's still his personal office. But yeah, so here's an example of a Khamsa. Like I said, I have, not all of them are religious. No, this is a very religious Khamsa, very Sufi Khamsa. So I have Khamsas that have Hebrew on them, Khamsa that have no prayers, that are just the symbol of the fingers. And the idea, and they found, like I said, artifacts going back several thousand years pre-biblical, of this design being used as a warder of the evil eye. So it is a phenomenon that has survived because it's a real thing. And this symbol energetically seems to be a shield against that thing. So it survived for thousands of years for a reason. I'll put this back. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. So we got some good questions in the chat here. And following up on that, Diego Flores says, something curious. Many Catholic saints are shown with a hand raised up, similar to the hand amulet. That's true. Yvonne, your mom always liked you better.
Okay, I am back. All right. Got a good view
of my this is slightly off topic.
Sure.
But Herc130 says, I bought the Screenwriter's Bible on your recommendation, not to write scripts, but to better understand storytelling better. Thank you for that recommendation. It has opened my eyes.
Well, you're welcome. And those who haven't read it, even if you just want to understand better storytelling, or if you're like, why does this thing I watched suck so badly, right? Read the Screenwriter's Bible by David Trottier. It is the first book I read on screenwriting. I read it 22 years ago when I was still a graduate school student in business school. I wrote my first screenplay off of that. I sold my first 2 scripts just from that book. I didn't have any other training, didn't take a single class. I wrote them. I read the book. I said, oh, that's how a screenplay works. I learned how to do it. And then I sold 2 to Paramount, and that's how I got in the Writers Guild. And then I later went to film school after that. So that is an incredible book, and I'm glad you read it. And I'm glad it was helpful.
And Philip Blair in the chat has a question, and it must be important because it's in all quotes. Question for Kamran. How do you get a negative entity or entities to stop attacking family?
Well, what you have to do then is find a spiritual tradition or a teacher or a healer that you trust. Like I said, I have all these Sufis that I know, and now, like, I've got my friend in Indonesia that she's not really a Sufi, she's just a psychic medium that comes out of this culture. You have to find one that you trust. If your family has connections, and if you're religious, your religious community will have people, even if it's considered fringe. If you're from more conservative elements of the community that don't want to talk about this stuff, your religious heritage will have people that deal with it. Every tradition has exorcists. My Jewish friends are shocked to discover that there are living exorcists today in Judaism. It's a real thing. They've been around. Taoists have exorcists. Every Tibetan monks have exorcists. It's a real phenomenon, right? If you look at the Gospels, the largest amount of miracles that Jesus is reported to have done in the Gospels is exorcism. He was primarily an exorcist. Mm-hmm. Other forms of healing that are very famous, giving sight to the blind, those stories are also in the Quran of Jesus doing those things. They are actually secondary to exorcism. The most famous thing, he's walking from town to town and he's driving spirits out. He's driving demons out and all. That's what he's known for. He's an exorcist primarily, and then he's all these other things. So all traditions have them, and I urge you to find it. And if you don't have access to anybody, reach out to me through Instagram. Or not that I necessarily have a solution for you, but I would suggest you start with what you're comfortable with, because I'm just going to plug you into my Sufi people, right? And that may not be a tradition you're comfortable with. And what works best is what works with your heart, right? And so if you don't, that's like I said, my Catholic friend wasn't able to exorcise the Muslim kid who was possessed with a Jinn because it had no meaning for him. So, but when someone from his reference came in, the thing was gone.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Canadian Spider-Man has a question. He says, when Kamran says one of my Sufi masters, he asks, how many is typical for one to have?
Well, typically most people just have one their whole life, right? And it's because the especially if you really want to get deep into it, you really need to focus on one teacher. Sufism is always, a point that our friend, your Muslim uncle Yasin, who's very popular on YouTube, shows up. Yasin points out that and this is. We know that George Lucas not only studied Taoism and the Eastern religions, he studied Sufism. There's a reason he went to North Africa to film Tatooine, right? He was familiar with North African mysticism. He was familiar with Sufism. There's a lot of Arabic words actually in
Hebrew.
And Hebrew words. Mustafar is actually a derivation of Mustafa, which is one of the names of the prophet. These are all things that are there, and so he knew that. And so, as your Muslim uncle will often say, that the Jedi mentor apprentice relationship is a direct parallel of Sufism, which is absolutely correct. It is very much a discipleship tradition that you learn, and even with the Jedi, they had thousands of Jedi, maybe a few dozen masters or whatever, but they all were training, and it was a one-on-one. So Obi-Wan was Qui-Gon's apprentice, and then Anakin was his apprentice, right? So there's a one-on-one. So in the Sufi tradition, if you really want to get deep into it, you focus on one. However, there's also a parallel to that, very much always been a tradition of Sufis meeting different masters and being initiated into multiple orders. The great traveler Ibn Battuta, I've written about a movie, you may not have heard of Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta was the Marco Polo of Islam. Same time period, 14th century. He actually traveled 3 times the distance of Polo. He was from Morocco, and he traveled from Morocco all the way to Indonesia and China, right? So he's the first human being that we know of that saw both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean with his own eyes. Polo never saw the Atlantic. He didn't get farther than the Mediterranean, right? And there's some that doubt whether he even got to China, whether that's just a story he made up. Mm-hmm. We know for a fact Ibn Battuta got to the ends of the earth.
But he brought back the pasta.
rock like that, which he could have gotten, which the critics of that story will say he easily could have gotten that from Persian traders, right?
Sure.
Easily. And so they claim that the problem is with Marco Polo's account is that he starts using all these Persian names for Chinese sites. He would have known the Chinese names, right? But I personally think he got there. I just think he used the names that he thought were known to the Persians. The Middle Easterners were the traders that were interacting with the Genoese, and so he used the terms that were familiar. I think he did get there. He describes a bridge that's still there in Beijing perfectly. There
you go.
With his own eyes, I think he saw it. And so, but Ibn Battuta. So Ibn Battuta, the reason Ibn Battuta was the bigger Marco Polo, and I've written a movie about him because he's an incredible adventure. And he, over the course of his decades traveling the earth, he kept meeting different Sufi masters and they all kept telling him that he had a destiny to go to China. He's like, I'm not going to China. That's crazy. Nobody goes to China, right? And then he keep bumbling forward until eventually 25, 30 years later, he ended up in China. And, and he kept being initiating in these different Sufi orders that met him because they saw that he had a destiny and they all wanted to guide him a little bit. And the funny thing, which is how my script is bookended. It's a true story from his own account. He left behind a 12-volume account, which is available in English, right? Which I have of his incredible journeys that he had. It is the most, there's information that Ibn Battuta gives us about stuff that was going on in North Africa, Middle East, Asia that nobody else knows about. That he's the only anthropologist to confirm, right? Because he saw his own eyes. But the story is that when he began as a young man, he started off like at 17, 18. He was going on pilgrimage to Mecca from Morocco, which was, a 7-month, 1-year-long journey to go to Mecca and come back. And that's all I thought he was going to do. But on his trip through North Africa, through the desert of what's modern-day Libya, I guess, he meets a Sufi master in the desert who says to him, yeah, you're not just going to go to Mecca. You're going to go to China, right? And you're going to meet my brother, my spiritual brother. I have a Sufi spiritual brother in China. And he's like, I'm not going to China. Are you crazy? Because I'm going to the moon, right? He's like, and then he has all these crazy adventures, and he never gets to go home, right? It's sort of like Quantum Leap, right? It's like Quantum Leap,
Oh boy,
Beckett doesn't get to go home, and all these adventures further. He's like, I want to go home, and he keeps going further, and eventually he gets to China, right? And there's an incredible thing after reading this 12-volume account of all of his adventures that covers like 30 years. He gets to China, and you've forgotten this from like volume 1, chapter 2, right? The story, and then he's like, well, I'm like 55 years old now, and I'm walking around. Han Balik, I guess, which is pre-Beijing, whatever. He's walking around there, and then he comes across this wizened old Sufi master who's there. He's like, "Oh, you're the guy. My brother told me you were coming. It took you a while, right?" It's like he's like sent a psychic message. I'm sending this guy to you, right? And then 30 years later, he's like, "I've been waiting for you for 30 years. You finally showed up." So, but so that's what happens. And so I'm very much a little bit, and one can see that as a fault. Is you can say, well, you're only getting a superficial level of understanding, because the true depth of the Sufi tradition is immersing with one teacher and going deeper and deeper in. But I'm kind of on my own path I learned from all these teachers, and I respect them all. And they're drawn to me. Like I said, I didn't choose my original Sufi teachers from West Africa. They called me. Literally, they called me through a friend of mine. And they reached out. They're like, they're sitting in a village, and they're like, who's this Cameron guy? So he called this friend of mine who's in LA. I was like, do you have a friend named Cameron? He's like, yeah, how do you know about that guy? He's like, oh, I saw him in a dream. I need him to call me. So I called him, and that's kept, now I have a 15-year relationship with that. He's the guy that I'll call. He's like, I don't like that girl you're dating. I'm like, oh, whatever, right? So, but he's a sweet guy. But that's the kind of thing. They choose you. And I've had these experiences where my paths cross these great sheikhs. And, I hope I can be of value to them. And whatever knowledge I can take for each one of them, I take. Like, I'm getting knowledge from Sheikh Miramati. Does that mean I'm not also getting knowledge from my West African sheikhs or my Jerusalem sheikhs? No, I'm getting information. And I'm trying to support all of these traditions, because that's sort of my path.
Definitely. And we have a very active chat going at the moment. And moving on here, as far as talismans go, is that part of the broader Muslim traditional culture?
Well, you saw one talisman. They're very common, the khamsa, the hand. Mm-hmm. But there's also what we call the taviz, which is very popular, especially in Indonesia and Indo-Pakistan, subcontinent. The taviz, probably throughout North Africa as well. But the taviz is basically a little amulet which has a Quranic verse on it. Sometimes it actually has like a piece of scroll that's wrapped in that has the verse, but often it's just inscribed on brass or whatever, silver, gold or whatever, and you wear it around the neck. And it's incredibly common. I've seen people who are deeply irreligious people wearing the taviz. It's almost just natural. Like, it's like, it's like the cross, I guess. But, most people don't wear a cross if they don't feel a connection to Christianity in some way. I've seen deeply irreligious people who might only barely identify as Muslim still wearing the taviz. That's how deeply it was. Yeah.
So widely pervasive in the culture.
Absolutely. And you'll have all these things are attacked by religious fanatics, fundamentalists. Let's say I mentioned North Africa, I mentioned India, Indonesia, right? The problem is Islam has been under attack for a century now by these fanatics coming out of Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabis, right? They're trying to put a new PR version where they're all slick and cool, and you got Beyonce dancing up in Jeddah, right? But they're still scumbags, right? And they've corrupted the religion, and they've tried to, and it's a direct attack on traditional Islam, especially Sufism, because they want to take away anything that's mystical. They want to really denude Islam and make it a very literalist thing, like a Puritan thing. And so all the people like, hey, Islam sucks as a religion. I'm like, that kind of Islam that isn't real Islam sucks. In the same way, it's like, I was hanging around the Salem witch trial. Christianity is crap. I'm like, yeah, those guys
right.
in Salem really don't reflect Christianity, right? As most Christians understand it, right? But so that's what we've got. Basically, Salem witch trial clowns are taking over Mecca, right? And so that's what we've got. And so they attack Sufism in general as un-Islamic, which is utter nonsense. I mean, Islam doesn't work without Sufism. Without Sufism, you've got this stupid fanatical crap, right? Which is nobody wants it. It doesn't work, and because it's the heart of it. It's like ripping a heart out and saying you've got a living body. You don't. Right, but the manifestations of that are these things that they say, "Oh, that's idolatry. What are you doing? Wearing a taviz. Did the Prophet Muhammad wear these things?" I was like, having a verse of the Quran on your body, what could possibly be wrong with that, right? I mean, it's like, it's a blessing. It's literally like everything. These guys are always afraid of what they call innovations. I'm like, if you go back to like the 19th century when loudspeakers, when modern microphones were invented, right? You started having loudspeakers being put into mosques for people to do the prayer call. And these religious fanatics were like, this is an innovation. The Prophet Muhammad didn't have a microphone. Like, what are you talking about, man? He didn't have a car either, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's irrational stuff, right? And its effort is to prevent the religion from being natural and real and try to calcify it in time, which no successful religion can be. Right, a religion. I'm not saying a religion has to change. Not at all. I'm traditional Muslim. I don't particularly like change. What it is there's a natural thing of how religion expresses itself in new forms, right? Without changing its tenets, without changing its ideas. And this idea of innovation is silly because in the Islamic tradition, a Sufi once said to me, whenever a fanatic like that starts talking about innovation, which is called bid'ah, which means just like what the first innovation is. Putting the Quran in a book. The Prophet Muhammad didn't do that.
Yeah, it was all oral tradition.
It was memorized. Yeah, it was like the memorization. Yeah. He couldn't read or write, so he couldn't put it in a book, right? He couldn't write it, so it was memorized. And after his death, then his followers had an intense debate about putting the text in a book because they're like, we didn't do that. He was all oral in his lifetime, and it was all memorization. That's all we need. And yet this religion is now expanding to this massive empire that suddenly goes from this couple of villages in Arabia to controlling half the planet in 20 years, right? They're like, there ain't that many people who memorize the Quran suddenly in Khorasan and in North Africa and Spain and everywhere else. You don't have that many people. You need to have a book that people can check, right? And so that argument won out, and then the Quran was codified by one of his direct students, one of his son-in-laws. Became the third caliph. So it was done within about 20 years of his life. And that's if you're upset about innovation. That's the first innovation. You're reading from a book. He didn't do that.
Yeah, and Herc 130 mentions that he lived in
Dahran.
Does he mean Dahran and Riyadh, and remembers the speakers from the mosques. And I was just going to add in one of my first and most memorable experiences of being in Jerusalem was hearing the call to prayer and how beautiful it was.
Yeah, it's there's nothing more beautiful than the human voice, and that's why we have this idea in our traditions of the word, right? In the Christian tradition, particularly the Gospel of John, which is the most mystical of the Gospels, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The idea of the Word being the essence of creation, the Quran says God creates from one word, kun fayakun, which means be and it is. Kun means be, fayakun means and it is. So God simply says kun be, and fayakun it is, right? And so sound is the essence of connection to God, right? Because the first movement out of God's innate sort of oneness, which is unchanging, and then within that oneness you have vibration, which is how creation happens. That's the first movement from sort of stasis of the divine. The first thing is the vibration of creation, of the word, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the human voice in the Islamic tradition is the best way to connect to God. And what's interesting is this is the most famous thing of Islam that people hear, the Quranic prayer. Watch the movie The Exorcist; it begins with that. I actually was interacting with William Friedkin when I was on Twitter. For whatever bizarre reason, one day William Friedkin starts following me. I'm like, "What? Is this a fake account?" I get a message: "William Friedkin's following me." I'm like, "It's actually William Friedkin, right?" I have no idea why he followed me. I was like, I don't know. But I was like, I immediately DM'd him. I was like, "Sir, what an honor to have you." He's like, "I saw something you tweeted. I tweeted. I liked it." So William Friedkin, in the days when I was on Twitter, if I was kicked off, was interacting with me, and so I actually talked to him about this. And Friedkin was like saying he put the Islamic prayer call in The Exorcist. It bookends the movie because he wanted. Now, Friedkin is Jewish, and the movie is a Catholic story. But Friedkin also, unlike a lot of my Hollywood friends who are Jewish and don't necessarily believe in these things like exorcism and tradition, they're more material in their understanding of Judaism. He believes in exorcism. He believes in spirits. He's seen it, right? So he knows.
He does.
And
I
so
remember hearing not too terribly long ago that when he was filming The Exorcist or writing, I guess it was not written by him. It was written by William Peter Blatty.
Yes.
But when he was shooting the movie, that he did not believe in real life exorcism. But today he does. And there was a documentary that was in the works that he was doing about actual exorcism. Have you heard about this?
I have. In fact, I believe the documentary was released. I certainly saw excerpts from it, which I know he had been doing. I saw him credited on it. But yeah, so he's one of these guys who, based on his own experiences, now believes in a metaphysical world, which is not common in Hollywood, right? And for a director to say that. But to go back to what I was saying about the prayer call, is that he said to me, because I said, is this true? And he said, that is what my intention. I said, is the reason you bookended it with the prayer call beginning and at the end? He said, is it because you wanted to show that the fight against evil is universal? Because people are going to say, it's just a Catholic Christian, like my conservative Catholic friend. Only his religion is true, right? And
right.
He's not like he's Jewish. And so he said, that's exactly why I did it. I wanted to show them that we all, we have to stand together with God against this other phenomenon, right? And all of our religions have to do it. So it's a Catholic story done by a Jewish guy that has the Islamic prayer call, which is meant to be the sign of hope, right? So that's William Friedkin is just one of the great geniuses of all time. But yeah, that's the purpose of it. It is a vibrational energy. And what's interesting about it, going to the mysticism we talk about, is that it was not actually established by the Prophet Muhammad. It was established by it was brought by one of his followers. One of his companions said to him one day, I had this vivid dream where I saw someone standing at the roof of the mosque calling out, and he said the prayer, Allah Akbar, Allah, God is great. There's no God but God. I testify that the Muhammad's messenger of God, come to prayer, come to felicity. God is great. That's what it translates to. And the Prophet heard that, and he said, that is a true dream. And we're going to start doing that. It didn't come from Prophet Muhammad. It came from one of his followers. The idea is this is something the community brought to the religion, right? And then he had an African freed slave who was one of the great heroes of Islam, Bilal, who stood up and did that. He had a beautiful, resonant musical voice, and he did that. And that began this tradition that continues today.
Another question from Diego Flores. He says, at Cardinal Sin, this is an important question. How much did Hollywood invoke things they shouldn't have with their films like The Exorcist, Poltergeist, Event Horizon, and so on?
Well, I'm going to talk about it. Let me just say, Event Horizon is one of my favorite horror films. If you haven't seen it,
Me too.
My friend Philip Eisner
And Poltergeist.
Philip Eisner, my friend, who just lived 10 minutes down the road from me. Philip Eisner's my friend. He wrote that screenplay, and he always likes to say, I'm an atheist. He's not. He's one of these guys who refuses to accept that he believes in God, but he obviously does because his work is teeming with it, right? But he's one of these guys. That's Philip's thing. I always tease him. He's like, I'm an atheist. I'm like, you're not an atheist. You're just a mystic. You just don't have the words for it, right? So he wrote that, and that's not a movie that would come from someone who doesn't believe. A movie that comes from someone that doesn't believe is what was that Prometheus, okay? That garbage film that ruined the Alien franchise.
The Alien franchise, yeah.
That comes from someone that does not believe in God, right? That's because he doesn't understand why people believe in God. He doesn't respect it. That movie is about faith, and it doesn't understand it in the slightest bit. In fact, it's quite contemptuous of it. I dislike that movie tremendously.
Maybe that's why it sucked so much.
Well, it's a rewrite. The original script, I think, was quite good, and then we brought in Damon Lindelof, who was creative loss.
Another cinematic antichrist.
Yeah, he was the guy that was the member of the club of the week, and they had to give him this thing, and that's where he actually blew his wad, because that's where it's like everyone's like, this movie sucks, man. And by the way, Lost kind of sucked at the end too, and then like everything you do kind of sucked, and then that sort of ended it for him, right? You don't hear Lindelof anymore, right? Because that was the mistake. He went too far, right? It's like, what is this crap movie, right? But to answer the question, movies definitely do that. I mean, we talked about The Exorcist, which William Friedkin said invoked forces. He had to bring an exorcist to cleanse the set because the crew would no longer participate because strange things were happening, and they felt that a demon had come to the set and they needed an exorcist to bless it, and he permitted that, in fact encouraged it. So he's very honest that he felt he opened a gateway with that. Poltergeist definitely is a gateway as well. This is going to now a layer of thing that's going to be hard for some people to believe, which is that those are not by accident. There's an occult layer to Hollywood that is very conscious that films are used as dimensional portals. It's aware of that and is doing it on purpose. And that goes back all the way to what I think is the second greatest horror movie of all time, because I do think The Exorcist is the greatest horror movie. The second greatest is Nosferatu.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't seen it,
great movie.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying today. I mean, it disturbs you. There's moments in that movie that haunt you. Like, man, I gotta shut this off. I can't. It's a silent film. I can't watch it. It's too much, right? And the reason is this, because it is a dimensional portal. Nosferatu, which I didn't know this when I was on Twitter. Someone told me this, and I researched it. It's right. So Nosferatu, the filmmakers, who were German filmmakers, right, behind the film, they were part of a sort of an infamous occult group called the Fraternitas Saturni. Right? I'm going to hold on. We'll show you a book. I'm back a second. Hold on.
Okay.
So here we go. So this is one of my books. It's in my library. I got a huge occult library. So Stephen Flowers is a great writer about occultism, about what we would call the left-hand path, which is sort of the dark side, the Sith. Right? So the Fraternitas Saturni is one of his books looking at this very infamous occult group that was very popular in the early 20th century. And apparently the filmmakers, the producers of Nosferatu were members of the Fraternitas Saturni. And they worshipped this being that was essentially this entity that looks like the Nosferatu that we see Count Orlok with the bald head and the ears. It's very terrifying. And they design, Count Orlok is terrifying. It's probably the scariest rendition of a vampire in history, and it's been mimicked so many times. Hell, they did a Buck Rogers episode where they mimicked it, right? Where you have Salem's Lot mimics that creature. It's so terrifying, right? It's because it's an archetype, and I'm using that word specifically because, as I learned from this Twitter tipster who told me you should look into this, it wasn't just they were trying to make a Dracula ripoff, which is what the movie was. They wanted to make a Dracula movie without paying the Bram Stoker estate the money they wanted, so they just did. But there was a deeper reason for that. They were making a movie to manifest the egregore, the thought being of Count Orlok, which was the being that they were worshiping in that group. And they wanted to bring it into the physical world, like the Ring. Right, once you see it, it enters your reality, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was they wanted to use the film.
It almost sounds like a tulpa.
It's exactly it. The more people start becoming aware of this being, the more energy you feed it, and the more it can give them power, and the more it can actually manifest in the physical world. And so there's a deeper reason why that, because what happened is the movie was released, and there was immediately Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, who I've written a great script about Florence and Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde and the vampire. It's great. But Florence, I know Florence quite well. I wrote research for the script. Florence sued them. You stole my husband's story and you didn't pay me, right? And then the court ruled in her favor, and all copies of Nosferatu were destroyed. So the metaphysical thing, all copies but one, as we will discover. The metaphysical thing is that there was sort of a response to that egregore. It was so dangerous that on the practical world, it was suppressed, right? So that entity would not enter our reality. And it remained suppressed for about 40 or 50 years until someone found, I believe it was in the 70s, one undestroyed canister of Nosferatu that was forgotten. And I don't know that it was forgotten. It feels like it's like the movie The Ring, right? You suppress the tape, but you just have to find one, right? And so now Nosferatu is back out there in the world.
And in 4K.
4K, and it continues to have its influence, right? So that's why you start seeing Nosferatu. When it reappears in the 70s, that's when you start seeing the Buck Rogers space vampire episode, which to this day is utterly terrifying, is based on Nosferatu. Salem's Lot is based on Nosferatu. It's so, that egregore, that being, found its way to reassert itself into the world. And so that is a real part of the occult side of Hollywood, where the movies and television shows are being used not just to do subliminal messaging and political brainwashing. They're actually being used to create tulpas, to use our collective imagination to give power to spiritual beings, usually not great spiritual beings, right?
Right.
And to bring them into this world. And the idea is that's a trade-off that the filmmaker is making, that if he can give this entity physical power in this world, it will do favors for him, like advance, literal deal with the devil. Suddenly become famous, right? And I would suggest that one of the great horror movies, and the guy behind it is a scumbag, doesn't change the heart, right? Which is Rosemary's Baby, right? And so Roman Polanski is a scumbag. He's a rapist and he's a bad guy, right? He's a great filmmaker. So we can just look at the film, right? So that movie, but if you look at that movie, this happens a year before his own wife is killed in a ritualistic killing, right? So the deeper you look into Roman Polanski, he's a very shady figure, and he has not only connections to the intelligence agencies. The deeper you look into it, and just not conspiracy theory, you can find the historical evidence of it. There's a great book. I'm going to show you another book. Hold on, I'm going to show you a book.
Okay.
So here's a great book that looks into Roman Polanski and the Sharon Tate killings and its connection to the CIA and to intelligence agencies by Tom O'Neill. So Tom O'Neill is not some weirdo conspiracy theorist. He started off as a fluff, for Empire Magazine. Remember Empire Magazine, that film
Sure.
magazine? So he started off writing fluff pieces for these film magazines, right? And he basically was doing a fluff piece decades ago on the impact of the Sharon Tate murders and, on Hollywood. And in just doing research for this fluff piece for an entertainment type magazine, he accidentally, he went to the old evidence blockers of all the stuff from the Charles Manson trial, and he found a piece of evidence that had not been released at the trial. And he's like, why wasn't this put out there? Because it could have exonerated Manson. It doesn't exonerate the fact that his followers killed him, but it was a piece of evidence that might have said, well, Manson wasn't actually the one that told him to do this, right? So it's in the evidence file. Why was this never given to the defense? It's there. And he started looking into that. All hell broke loose. He's talked to the original prosecutors, the original cops, and they're like, you better stop looking into this right now. And so he goes, what? So he starts going deeper and deeper, just following this one thread that gets bigger and bigger. And he starting to discover it's because there was a CIA plant inside of the family. And that he was the one manipulating all of them. He identifies the guy, proves the guy was in the CIA. He proves the guy was an intelligence agent. He talks to his daughter. She's like, "Oh, you know about this crap, right?" And so it unravels, and he literally unravels that the entire family was a CIA experiment in LSD drug control, mind control, and to see what it could be done, and could you create assassins out of it, like that old MK Ultra stuff. Because he finds again all the publicly available evidence that no one looked at, that Charles Manson, when he was in prison before he started the family in the early 60s, his prison psychologist turned out to be one of the people that we know was the top psychiatrist in MK Ultra, which is a brainwashing thing, right? Look,
Right.
This guy was this. Why is this guy? Why does nobody know this guy was his personal psychiatrist in prison? So you're like, oh, this guy was recruited into MK Ultra to create assassins. What? And then it's too overwhelming. It's too overwhelming, right? And so he put this book out, which is from Little Brown, which is a very prestigious publisher. We're not talking about National Enquirer here, right? And it's an incredible book. And his life just gets turned upside down because he's delving into this thing that people are like, you need to stop looking into this, because you're like, Charles Manson's story is actually a CIA thing, but even worse, he actually finds connections to the occult, right? That Polanski. Well, why was Polanski targeted? And Polanski was also involved with these characters and involved with weirdo occultists. So bringing it back to his movie Rosemary's Baby, which came out, I believe, and it was made in '68 and came out in '69. You know, a woman is forced to bear the child of Satan, right, by these normal people who turn out to be satanic occultists, right?
Right.
And so it's a great movie, but you're like, what is this thing? And you realize, oh, this is him revealing what's going on. You know, because here's something metaphysical I want to bring to you, which is the idea that the dark side, the left-hand path, has to reveal its plan. It's God's rule. God will let you do your thing, but you have to reveal it. Because then it gives people the free will to follow the path or not. So they can't say, oh, I didn't know, right? It's like, no, you knew. And so I'm going to bring this back to the story of Iblis, right? So there is this thing that in the Quran, there's a story of these angels who did not understand, like Iblis, they didn't understand why God would create these human beings that would rebel against him and commit sin and all this stuff. So in the days of ancient Babylon, the story in the Quran is these angels are called Harut and Marut. Yes, I got a crazy memory. Thank you so much. I love this stuff. I can't stop talking about it. So Harut and Marut are these two angels that are named in the Quran. And this is the only fallen angel story in the Quran, because Iblis is not technically an angel, he's a jinn, right? But so these angels are then sent to Babylon. And God said, okay, you want to understand human beings? Because they're not openly rebelling the way that Iblis said, I'm not. They're questioning God. I don't get it. God said, oh, you don't get it? All right, well, I'll explain it to you. And he lets them become human for a day. Gives them a physical form and experience. He experienced physical, like, what was the movie of Michael Landon, like, Highway to Heaven, right? He becomes physical, right? And they become physical. And immediately, within seconds, they are overwhelmed by the beauty of women. They start drinking. They start partying. All human vices explode out of them because they've never experienced what it's like to have physical desires. They can take human form, but it's not real human form. It's a projection, right? Now they're actually given human intention and body and desires, and they go crazy, and they end up, this part is, there's more details that preside in Islamic tradition. All the Quran tells us is they were sent there and they taught men black magic. But the backstory in the Sufi tradition explains. So they had this thing, and they both fall in love with a beautiful woman who's like, basically, if you kill my husband, I'll basically bang both of you, right? And they're like, oh my God, she's so hot. So they kill the husband. And so they realize what they've done. And God has given them like a code word, like a safe word, to return to being angels once they've had their experience. So they start using the code word. It doesn't work anymore. They're trapped as angels in physical form because they've sinned, right? And so that story is sort of the legendary construct around it. But what the Quran tells us is that there were these two angels, Harut and Marut, that existed in Babylon that taught human beings magic, right? Essentially black magic. Because it says it taught them the ability to create problems between husbands and wives and break them apart or whatever. Sort of like that husband that the wife said to kill, right? So, but in the Quran says this is the pivotal point of the story, is that whenever they taught people the power, the angelic names and how to use that for magic, because that they were trapped now on Earth, and that was all they could do to survive, right? They can't make any money, right? They're here. So this is how they make money. They teach people magic, right? But they were compelled by God to warn the people, tell them what will happen. So whenever they taught somebody black magic, they would say, don't do this. It will ruin you. We're teaching you something that's going to destroy you. You will end up in hell. You'll get a brief moment of success, and it will all be taken away from you, and you'll end up in hell. People are like, yeah, I don't care. I want it. And so he teaches them. So the black magic tradition of Babylon originates from these two fallen angels in the Quran, right? But the central idea of that is that they were required to reveal their intention and the plan and the consequences so that the people could choose it. So evil especially occultic evil, must reveal its intentions. It must put itself out there so that you can't claim you didn't know, right? And so that is why we have all this stuff is like predictive programming in television and movies. Like, ooh, it's really weird. The Simpsons keep predicting stuff that's going to happen 20 years later, right? It's because they're telling you what the plan is because they have to. So that now you have all the evidence that there's predictive programming and that maybe the events of the world that you're hearing in the news aren't what they appear to be because the evidence is in front of your face. You can choose to ignore it and say, I don't believe it. But at what point do you go, how can the Simpsons be right about everything? It's because you don't want to believe it, because you just don't want to accept the reality that is staring you in the face, that you're being manipulated by evil people. Right? And you don't want, because it's too hard for you to face it and do your job.
It's horrific. Yeah.
And your job as a human being is to stand up against evil, right? In the Islamic tradition, every human being is a caliph, which means a viceroy of God on earth. So your job as a human being is to stand up against evil. So when evil is presented to you and it's self-evidently you're being manipulated by the media, by politicians who are obviously lying to you. You know they're lying to you, right? We went through that for the last 2 years. They know they're lying to you. This stuff doesn't make any sense. You know, but because it's too hard to go against the mob of idiots who also think it's too hard to go against it, you just want to fit in. You go along with it and tell yourself, I'm no. There's no conspiracy. No. You see it. That's God's plan. It's like, okay, well, you knew it. You knew in your heart that you were being lied to and you're being misled by these people, and you did it anyway. Oh, well. And that's what these movies, like what he put out there, and that's the tragedy of Sharon Tate. He put out there his occultic connections. In that movie, in Rosemary's Baby, the husband is a sort of wannabe actor who makes a deal with the devil, and he basically becomes a famous actor because his rivals for the roles keep having accidents and dying and so he keeps getting their jobs, right? And he's willingly hurting those people to become famous and giving his wife over to actually manifest the Antichrist on earth, right? And what is Polanski doing there? He's talking about his own deal. He's talking about his own occultic deal that he will become a famous filmmaker if he does what the occultic groups want. And guess what they do? What they want? They want his wife and his unborn baby. Just like the very movie, a year before, his movie is predictive programs the horrific murder of his own wife. It's a pretty horrible deal to make, right?
Yeah. Wow.
That's why I was in a film festival in Morocco 15 years ago in Marrakesh, and he was Roman Polanski was one of the judges of the Marrakesh Film Festival, and I entered a party at the festival that year, and I was with a friend of mine, and it was a party, and it was hanging out with stars or whatever. And suddenly, my friend's like, "Oh my God, there's Polanski! He's just come in!" Like, and she didn't give a damn that he, most people in Hollywood, she didn't give a damn who he was. Like, everyone in Hollywood was in awe of this guy, right? And I'm in awe of his talent, not in awe of him as a human being. So my friend immediately went up to him, and she said, "Come on, we got to talk to Polanski." I said, "No, I'm not going to talk to this guy. He's a child rapist. And he's an occultic dude who's, his wife got killed by the occult world that he pulled into, right? His baby." So I'm actually not going to talk to this guy. And I turned and I walked out because it repelled me to be in a room with this guy, right? And so my friend then told me she went up to him, and she didn't get to talk to him either because she made a mistake. Everyone is in Morocco. They're all talking French, which is a common language there, right?
Right.
And he's living in France, so he talks French, obviously. And so she comes up to him and makes the mistake of saying hello to him in English and speaking to him in English. The moment she spoke to him in English, he turned white and he hightailed it out of there because he thought she was sent by the government to grab him. By the US government. So anyone speaks English, he was gone. He walked out of there. He just turned and left, right? But that's the life this clown has to lead now because of the deal with the devil that he made, And God bless Sharon Tate. She didn't deserve that. What happened to her?
No.
That was the deal. And he's living the legacy of that deal.
I have to tell you, Cameron, for some reason, deal with the devil stories have always been my favorite since I was a little kid. Movies like The Devil's Advocate and my favorite horror movie, and I am a horror movie buff, so for me to say this is a big deal. My favorite horror movie is The Ninth Gate.
Wow, that's very specific. A lot of people love that movie. They wouldn't say it's their favorite. So tell me about this. Tell me why it's your favorite.
Well, first of all, it has Frank Langella in it, who is one of my personal heroes. You know, you
He's
can't go
getting
wrong with Frank Langella.
He's getting canceled, but whatever. He's still a good actor.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
That was news to me.
Yeah. He's getting canceled, whatever.
And the whole plot of sending the Johnny Depp character to these other, occult book collectors, and there are only 3 copies of this specific book, and he wants to know which one is the real one, so that he can, he doesn't tell this to the Johnny Depp character, but so that he can summon the devil, and I guess I can't go any further without going into spoiler territory, but if you guys haven't seen The Ninth Gate, definitely check it out. Great movie.
But again, that's predictive programming, in the same way, my favorite website about this is vigilancitizen.com, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If we could put a link to it, Vigilant Citizen is the most sophisticated. It's been up there for over 10 years. And all it does, and people are like, crazy conspiracy side. I'm like, no, just look at it. All it does is it pulls up images from popular culture, a lot of music videos, but also from film and television. And it just shows they're openly occult. You're like, it's not, well, that's obviously satanic occult stuff. That's not, you're seeing so many. And with regard to Tolfer, was Sharon guilty by association? I obviously didn't know Miss Tate. From what I've read and from what this book Chaos suggests, is that, he basically pulled her in. I don't think she knew what was going on. She just went along with him. She loved him. He was a charismatic filmmaker.
Sure.
Apparently, the book reveals, that, one of the people that he talked to had actually during when they came to find, when the police came through the house where she was killed, whatever, they found something that was not released to the public. They found a tape, which was a tape of him Polanski basically filmed her having a gangbang just for his own orgiastic pleasure, right? I mean, something. He just forced her to do that, right? And they didn't release that to the public, obviously, because out of respect for her dignity, right? But that's what he was making her. I mean, he was making her bang all these guys just to be a voyeur, right? He was making her do all kinds of stuff. I don't think she was willingly a participant in any occult thing. I mean, that's why she was targeted and killed in a really horrible way, right? I mean, it was an occult sacrifice of her and her baby, right? So it's because I'm sure because she wasn't going along with it. She was trying to leave him, and that was too much.
And something that maybe a lot of folks out there don't know, who might even be horror movie buffs, is that Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan, can be briefly seen in the film as the father of the baby. Okay. So and they consulted him. But,
so he played Satan? Was it LaVey?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. And I'm going to show you one more thing. Hold on.
Okay.
So another very tragic example. So here's a famous photo in sort of this old issue of LA Weekly that I've got, which is there's Anton LaVey, and do people realize who that is?
Who the woman is?
The woman is, yes. Now I'm people saying my memory is there. It is. Hold on, I'm going to tell you in a second, and it's absolutely.
Is it Marilyn Monroe?
No, it's not Marilyn Monroe. I'm absolutely so stupid that my brain is because my brain does get tired. And so hold on.
I imagine all the thinking you do.
All right, hold on. Okay, I will tell you in 1 second. Okay, of course. This is so utterly idiotic that my brain got because I love beautiful women, and she was one of the most beautiful women of all time. This is Jane Mansfield.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Was sort of,
she was a member of the Church of Satan. Yeah,
exactly. This is her, Jane Mansfield, worshiping with him. And so Mansfield, also had a very strange death, as you know. She was killed in a car accident.
Decapitated, yeah.
Decapitated, and her children were in the back seat. And if those who don't know her children, Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order SVU was her daughter. And she was in the back seat. She and her older brother. Mariska must have probably been about 2 years old, right? But they were little children, and they were in the backseat. They were miraculously saved. I do believe they were saved angelically because I think the whole thing was meant to. I mean, yes, it was an accident, but it's a pretty horrific accident. It feels like an accident, like unto the accidents that are being described in Rosemary's Baby, right? It's just like a car accident that decapitates this woman. I do believe she was an occult sacrifice, and that spiritual forces, caused that event. Her death car, as it's called, was actually here in Los Angeles. There was a museum looking at sort of the famous celebrities and these things. And the owner of that museum had the original death card in his thing. I went to the museum. It's now closed to the public. It closed, unfortunately, during the lockdowns, and he's no longer opening that exhibit up. But I saw the original death car there, which is the car that crashed. He has it, and I actually was able to get a small section of it. He gave me one that I keep in my safe, right? Like a little piece from the windshield, just as a reminder. It's tragic. She was just a young actress who, just like everything else actors, all these people, they just want to be cool, right? And LaVey was the way to get into the cool crowd. It was the way to get access to top producers and whatever. She got into that world, and then the world destroyed her.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you're right. When you stare into the abyss stares back.
And you can't say, and they all know it. Like when you're joining the Church of Satan, I mean, what do you think getting involved in, right? I mean, look, and I'm familiar with it. I mean, the official thing is, because I've read LaVey's books. I have LaVey's books, right? And I've got all kinds of I've got LaVey's books, right? And LaVey is just arguing that he's not arguing for a theistic Satan. He's saying that, that conservative religion has suppressed the human instinct. He's more making like a Friedrich Nietzsche argument about rediscovering your inner power, right? Which is sort of the Sith argument, right? That religion has suppressed you and humbled you and humiliated you, and now you can find your own authenticity. And they're using the idea of Satan as a symbol. And so he presented it to the world as a non-theistic idea, as a rebellion against the corrupt religious structures of the world. That he wasn't claiming to actually be in contact with the spirit. He claimed he didn't believe in those things. He claimed he didn't believe in the supernatural. I don't believe him for 1 second. I absolutely believe he knew he was working with actual entities, and he was just presenting it to the world as your standard 60s rebel, right? I'm speaking up against the church and all of its corruption or whatever, and I don't believe in God. I don't believe in damn devils. I'm just using this idea. He knew exactly what he was doing, right? And I have friends of mine who are in the occult. They're part of the Lima, which Aleister Crowley is a religion, occult religion that Aleister Crowley started, and they will tell me, because in that world they know what LaVey was, and LaVey was a supernatural occultist. He just lied to the world because it was an easier sell. So I don't know if you're still there. Did we lose you? I guess I've taken over. Have I taken over the channel, guys? I don't know what's going on. So I have no idea where Gil is. So I'm going to look at the chat until Gil comes back. Anybody have questions and stuff? I don't know what's going on here. So I'm going to look at the chat right now. So you guys have questions here, throw them in the chat until Gil comes back and takes over his channel. Maybe what happened when I talk about the supernatural is happening now to what happened to me when I got kicked off. It could be my, Malia Grimm says it could be my Jinn playing with you again. It could very well be. That's cool. I guess I'm in charge. So it's my show now. I'm in charge. It's just like Alexander Haig said when President Reagan was shot. I'm in charge, right? When he wasn't. And so that doesn't always go well. So I don't know if there's questions here. It's I guess Malia Grimm, she's mad you didn't notice my comment about you from her. Can you repost it? I'm sorry, I was talking so much I didn't see all the things. But okay, we've got a question on what are your thoughts on Eyes Wide Shut? Eyes Wide Shut, is very much the opposite in some ways of what I'm talking about, which is Eyes Wide Shut was the effort to reveal the occult reality of Hollywood. Not in the predictive programming, Harut and Marut, I have to show you what I'm going to do, but to reveal the existence of Harut and Marut, right? Which is a threat to the system. So, you have Stanley Kubrick putting out there these occult sex parties, whatever, and the power structures behind it. And then he dies mysteriously in his sleep before the movie is released, right? People say, it just happened. Old dude, right? Yeah, I don't think that's what happened. I absolutely believe that he was... that he was taken out by the system, that he revealed something that was too dangerous, which are the Eyes Wide Shut parties. And I can tell you for a fact that they continue today, that occultic sex ritual parties are very central to Hollywood. I knew a young woman, I think Mike is here. Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Wassalamualaikum salam. Look who's here.
Mike is here. Just as I start talking about sex, he shows up. It's like the devil.
I was watching the show, of course, and I wasn't feeling too well. I was on the sofa just watching the show on the big screen TV this whole time. and sending in comments from my phone. And then our man Cardinal Sin went down, so I ran upstairs and fired up the laptop. And fortunately, being a producer of this channel, like Midnight Sage, I don't really need a link. I can just pop in.
You can go straight in. Well, I'm glad you're here. I hope he's okay. I hope my Jinn didn't mess with him. I maybe just lost power there. It can't. There may be.
This isn't the first time. I wanted to tell the people who are watching the show. This isn't the first time that sometimes things like this happen. In fact, of note, I don't know if you had caught this, but when we did the show, when I produced the show with the Shaking You on Doomcock's channel, there was a audio recording that Doomcock was getting every time certain questions or topics came up.
Yeah.
Like a sound buzzing type of thing, and it was very noticeable. And Corione, our good friend Corione, picked up on it, translated it, and it was a very interesting experience. And so
I believe he said he discovered it was Punjabi. It was actually from Pakistan, and that so it was the spirit speaking, right? And so Punjabi is. It's not a language I speak, but my brother-in-law speaks it, and it's a common language. So these spirits may have very well been my Jinn, who seems to have been connected to my great-grandmother, right?
And things are meant to happen a certain way when you're in the Sufi way. You and I were talking this afternoon about some upcoming travel plans. Yeah. You happen to be booked on the show. Show goes down. Here we are. These things happen together.
No, these things happen together. I want to address a couple of things, Mike, that I'm seeing in the chat. So I want to finish what I was saying about Eyes Wide Shut. So people ask me, do you think Kubrick was a hero? I'm like, yeah, I believe Kubrick was a hero. Kubrick was trying to reveal the occult nature of it, and that violates the fundamental rules of keep your mouth shut unless we're doing productive programming, right? And so he was taken out, in my opinion. And I know for a fact that these occult parties are real because I know people who've attended them, right? I know a young woman who is in the adult industry, a porn star, right? And she told me very directly that some of her best income comes from being hired by famous Hollywood people to go to their mansions and participate in not just gangbang, banging people, whatever. Not that it's occult stuff. Like she'll be hired essentially to be a sex worker at these parties where they're chanting from occult texts, just like an Eyes Wide Shut, right? And they're doing it's an energy thing, it's a magic ritual, and she's hired for that. And let's just say some very prominent people that would shock you have been people that have been participants in this, and so it's a real phenomenon. I will share with you a story which I hope Corian will be okay with me sharing this with you because we mentioned our friend Corian. Corian is a very interesting person. He's involved in the Wiccan tradition, right? He's a mystic in his own way. He's a magician, and I consider him a good friend, like I consider you, Mike. And so he's an interesting guy. He's very different from us because we're Sufis on a different spiritual path, but he's on his own spiritual path. And so he contacted me some time ago, probably maybe almost 9 months ago, whatever, and contacted our friend Doomcock as well. And he said that he had placed a protective spiritual protection around me and around Doomcock because we're talking about these metaphysical things on his show, and he's just like, I'm worried that some of the people in Hollywood that are involved in this dark occult won't want you talking about this like they didn't want Kubrick talking about it, right? So he called me and said, I want to talk to you about something that happened. And basically someone had he received an email or a message from a Twitter account that had been created that morning. That's those one of these fake accounts that someone had created that morning just for the purpose of contact, and said, I need to talk to you under an occult flag of truce in whatever language these magicians have with each other. He gave him sort of the code word saying that, can we talk privately, right? With in truce. I'm like, oh, what's this all about? And he said apparently this person contacted him, and Corian then spoke with this person on the phone. He won't reveal to me who he is or who they're associated with. That's part of his arrangement to protect confidentiality under their agreement of truce. Was this person claimed to be representing an occult group here in Los Angeles, and that they had been hired to actually put a black magic spell on me because they didn't like me talking about the Eyes Wide Shut stuff and the occult stuff on Doomcock's channel and now here on Gil's channel. They didn't like it because that you're not supposed to talk about it, right? And I was putting it out there, and they had never seen anybody who's actually a working person in the industry acknowledge its existence, right? Right. Oh, right. Now I'm like, it's real. Because I don't fear them, I fear Allah, I fear God, right? I don't know, but. So, and they said they put the spell, but they didn't know that there had been a counter protection spell. And I'm sure I also have my protections from my Sufi masters, right? But they didn't know that I had these spiritual protections. And so apparently the person that had in their group that had been assigned to give Cameron a James Mansfield car accident ended up it boomeranged, and they ended up being hit by a bus and being put in the hospital. The very thing that they had actually programmed to be sent to me. And so this frightened that group, and they decided to reach out to Corian, who they knew I had a relationship with, and they said, "All right, well, you nearly killed one of our people. How do we stop this?" And Corian told them, "Just leave Cameron alone. Let him talk about what he wants to talk about, and just don't. If you attack him, it will go back to you." And this is also, and it's Corian, but my Sufi masters have also told me this completely separately. They several years ago told me about specific people saying, they like we talked earlier when Gil was on about the evil eye. They're like, the eye is on you, but it's not just a normal eye. It's a very powerful occult eye. People are like, this idiot shouldn't be talking. This is random Pakistani nobody talking about stuff, right? And they said, we've now given you protections, and they gave me specific prayers to use to turn it back on these people. So it's very interesting, the story, which Corian did not know about, the very thing they tried to do me ended up being done to them, right? And so that's the world. But Kubrick, I guess, didn't have that protection.
No. Another question comes in about whether or not you've read Christopher Moore's Practical Demon Keeping.
I have not. I actually have several books from Moore that people keep saying I have not read Moore's books. I have them. So maybe this is a sign for me to read them. Like my friend who was, read the Castaneda books when she was meant to. Because people keep saying that Christopher Moore is someone that I would deeply identify with. So if you want to put in the chat, welcome back, Gil. What happened, Gil?
I don't know. I think I went through a brownout, and I had to reset my modem, and it was all the Jinn.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not a normal thing, right? And so
No.
we while you were gone, we talked about an incident where basically I had a spiritual attack that our friend Corian, witch in residence, was aware of, and he actually spoke with the people behind it, who were part of the Occult Hollywood group, and basically they reached an understanding to leave me alone. But it was because I was talking about these things, and nobody in Hollywood talks about these things. Kubrick just hinted at these things, and they killed him, right? But also, as we were saying to Mexican Iron Man here, well, Kubrick didn't, to my knowledge, have any spiritual protection. He wasn't part of any mystical order. He wasn't a Sufi. He didn't have anyone helping him. He just felt like I had to put this information out there because he morally felt he had to do it, and they took him out. And I, by God's grace, I have spiritual protection, and so this occultic attack stuff backfires. But it's obviously not something you want. I mean, in all, not joking, this will be seen by those people, and just want to let you know, please don't try that again, because so far it's not working out for you. People have tried to disrupt my career for 20 years, and they've even tried now to do these kinds of things. I'm like, they haven't stopped me, because I'm part of something bigger, right? That's protecting me, even if I may not be worthy of it, whatever. That you're going up against a bigger phenomenon that you don't understand. It's what Obi-Wan said. You strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you could ever imagine, Darth, right? And so it's like, come at me. I'm just a random dude who wants to make movies and likes hot chicks, but there's other stuff going around me that's more powerful. And thank you, Sigurd. That was a lovely prayer you put out there. I'm not going to comment on specific celebrities. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. There is a limit to how.
Yeah, we covered the Eyes Wide Shut discussion.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, there's a limit to what's safe for Gil and for Mexican Iron Man, as well as myself. So no, I'm not going to give names of people. Like, I will talk about stuff that's publicly known, like Polanski's occult connection. That's been publicly reported.
Yeah. I'm going to let you guys finish the show. I just came in for the save as soon as you went down, Gil.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Expert co-host indeed.
He is wonderful.
He is. I'm trying to find the link for the giveaway, because
we're got to start winding down now, right?
It's that time, yeah. So there we go. That's the link to the giveaway for the Into the Fringe t-shirt. And while we have up that link, Adventure Industries asks, do you think Ezra Miller is involved in the occult?
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, again, I don't know that for sure. But his behavior is not normal, even by the standards of,
weird Hollywood people.
Weird Hollywood, too many drugs, too much whatever. That's not normal. And the protection he has when he should have been fired a long time ago is not normal, right? It's the same thing with like Amber Heard, right? I've heard from people that Amber has this kind of occultic connection, and it's part of what is she's the protective forces that are trying to keep her still going. But it appears Johnny Depp has, whether it's intentional, spiritual or not, he's got a tulpa of all the people that believe in him that's been protecting him. So there's an energetic war between them. But Ms. Heard is involved in this other world, even if I don't know that she's aware of what she's involved in, but she's participated in that world. And Ezra Miller's behavior similarly makes no sense to me unless you factor that in.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to call a mod in. I'm going to try and summon a mod with a wheel so that we can give that wheel a spin and give away a brand new Into the Fringe t-shirt to a lucky winner. Whether that's Jill or Canadian Spider-Man or Darius Munchausen or Mexican Iron Man, whoever's got that loaded wheel, please manifest here with us. And
that's good. All of them are wonderful. And Anti-Derivative Jill, I haven't seen in a long time. I've been on YouTube, so it's nice to see you.
Yeah. And while we are, let's see, she's looking for Canadian Spider-Man. And Anti-Derivative Jill says, I'm still giving the giveaway 2 more minutes to enter since you just came back.
Okay, looks like Canadian Spider-Man is joining us, hopefully. Okay. Yeah.
Hello, Canadian Spider-Man.
Hey, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you both. Hi, yeah, and thanks.
Wait, are you in like Abraham Lincoln's log cabin? Where are you, man?
Yeah, I'm at my house. This is for the winter here.
Oh, God bless. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
I split this all by hand.
He cuts cords of wood daily.
So you are inherently more masculine than everyone in Hollywood I know, right there. I mean,
Oh, really? Oh, thanks, Cameron. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate. Although that's a low bar, I think.
it is a low bar. There's no, I mean, these dudes can't even lift an axe unless it's like a fake one that's given to them by the stunt prop guy. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Do they own an axe? Maybe not.
They might own ritual axes that are part of occult ceremonies.
Oh, good tie-in.
Ari says you've been busy with the chainsaw.
Yeah. My electric solar-powered chainsaw. Yes, no joke.
Wow, it's incredible.
That's very cool.
Well, that's gonna be the next Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, which is gonna be very eco-friendly, right? Green friendly. It's gonna be. Leatherface is gonna have the
and then
the
at night it runs out of power and he doesn't know what to do. I'm surprised. I don't know why, but Cameron, I'm surprised that you know about Leatherface.
I love horror movies. I love all. I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre original movie is one of the most terrifying movies of all time.
Yeah.
It disturbs me. You know, when Universal Studios has its like horror haunting, stuff. I went one year when they had the Leatherface was part of it, and that scared the hell out of me. Like I was okay with the Freddy house and like the Jason Friday the 13th house. When we went into the Leatherface house, where every room has a different version of Leatherface coming at you, right?
Wow.
I almost had a heart attack. I mean, it's too much.
Do they have the chainsaws going and stuff?
Yeah, they have the chainsaw. It makes a sound. Obviously, it doesn't have the chain, whatever.
Right.
But,
yeah.
but
I went to a haunted house, like a Halloween haunted house, like that once, and they had the chainsaw running, and I was mostly just peeved at the noise.
Well, I guess we have different sense of fear.
Loud.
But yeah.
Yeah.
But that movie works. You know why that original movie works? It's actually not gory. All of the horror is implied. You don't see.
Right.
You don't see the blood. I mean, it's too.
Which is, I think,
you see the axe. You see this. It's enough for you to see it, and that's all you need. And you put it in the rest.
I think they're much more effective than the kind of slasher film where you see everything on screen. It leaves nothing to the imagination, right?
Yeah, and what you imagine is much worse.
Psychological thriller.
Absolutely.
So we got this thing. We got a wheel. What's going on?
So I'm just checking the chat. I'm just waiting for the wheel to appear in the mod chat, and I don't see it yet. I know Anti-Derivative Jill is making it, and she's really good with these sorts of things.
Yes, she is.
No,
Quality
she
takes
just
time.
here it is. It's
Okay,
just
all right.
being put in now.
Okay, great. Well, what I just want to quickly plug my Patreon because you guys know I've been away from YouTube. I might make brief return to Midnight's Edge this Friday with our friend Andre because he's a good friend of mine. I think with all the events that have happened with Bob Chapek in the past few days, which I predicted, out of just sort of take a victory lap of where we've been for a year and a half talking about him. I may return. I may do a couple of others in the next few days, but then I got to go back out because I got a lot of work to do. And also for the metaphysical thing, there's a lot of evil eye on me in Hollywood. I'm more worried about the evil eye from people that don't like my Star Wars opinions than I am from occultists, right? That evil eye of like, oh, you like Ms. Marvel? Well, screw you. I mean, that evil eye is more dangerous than the Eyes Wide Shut evil eye. It really is. They're crazier.
Yeah, and Ari says, you think you see the girl hung on the meat hook, but it's never really there.
Yeah, you see him put her up, and you know the hook is there. It's just seeing her hanging. You never see the thing enter her body. It's too much. It overwhelms you.
Phantom Boomer mentions The Uninvited starring Ray Milland was one of the creepiest movies I've ever seen, and all you see of the ghost is a mist. I'll have to take a note about that.
Called The Uninvited, which is it's a popular sort of true story of a ghost haunting that may be based on that book. I don't know.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, if anyone doesn't, I subscribe to Shudder, which for me as a horror fan, I'm obsessed with it.
Joe Bob Briggs is a personal close friend of mine.
I mean, if you like horror, I mean, I'm very reluctant. I'm really resistant to paying more money. It took me forever to go to Discovery Plus.
More streaming, yeah.
But now I watch Discovery Plus all the time. And Shudder, I was like, I'm fine. And I got to admit, I'm addicted to it because I'm seeing all these horror movies I didn't know about. Like some really scary French movies I saw that terrified me. The scariest stuff, like even just like seeing clips from them is too much. Like Indonesian horror movies, Indonesian ghost stories. I mean, I can't watch the trailer. It's that scary. So I'm like, I mean, the Shudder is worth the money.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so it looks like we have something which is not showing up. It's from Canadian Spider-Man, but it's not showing up.
Mike is there. Do you know how to do this?
Canadian Spider-Man, can you reshare your wheel? Because I don't see it. Oh, there it is. There we go. All right, spin it. Let Cameron get on with his evening.
We spinning? Half spinning? Sort of spinning? What's going on?
Oh, the sound's not on, so we can't tell.
It's kind of spinning. Yeah, okay.
Yes, I can. You got it?
Joe Salazar, congratulations.
Good for you.
So,
yeah,
Joe.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go.
Go ahead and send me an email here at gil@sunflower.com. Provide your details.
It certainly was spinning.
The size of your
Joe Salazar.
your shoe size and your mailing address, obviously, and we'll get that out to you.
Joe
Cameron,
Salazar.
I do want to thank you once again, my friend, for coming on Into the Fringe. I apologize that I dropped out, but it's equipment failure. So we really did have a great conversation, and I wish you peace and all great things in your coming endeavors.
Well, thank you, Gil. It's always wonderful being on your channel. I've been on your channel several times, been on with Maria, who I couldn't come on today. But if those who want to keep following me, I'm going to plug it because that's my one of my rare angles to the outside world right now, because I'm very deeply working on a project that I want to be able to announce soon. That's the proudest thing I've done in my career. It's a big deal.
Oh, great.
But let's get to a place where I can announce it. So I'm working on it to get it to that place. But yeah, so until then, I'm not doing a lot of these YouTubes. I'll do one for a few days right now just to talk about Chapek, but I'm going to go back into hiding very shortly. So the best way to interact with me and to follow my views on things, and they can be very controversial. Gil follows me on Patreon. He knows I just put my opinions out there. They're not always what everyone wants, But the great thing, the Patreon that we've created, is that there's several hundred people on there now, and they've created a wonderful community where there's broad disagreement, but there's no disrespect, which has been happening a lot in the fandom. You know, half my Patreon loves the new Obi-Wan, half of them hate it. And
I know, it's crazy.
I mean, it's polarized. Love it or hate it. And we're having very intense but honest discussions. And I'm proud of that. And I have my opinions. I'm not afraid to share those opinions. So please join me on the Patreon. It's a way you can support me, and you can interact with me directly on there. And I do screenwriting consulting and writing consulting on there.
And I have to say, from personal experience, it is worth it. Absolutely.
I mean, it's not something most people at my level of professional, actually working screenwriters offer, but it's my way of actually helping people do what nobody helped me do, which is figure out how to be a success at this, right? I had to figure it all out through making mistakes, and no one could have helped me, did. And so I'm trying to change that. And so please join me. The link's on there, and I'd love to interact with all of you.
Yeah. Did you put the link in?
I put it in there. You can put it in if you want to put it in the final version of this in the thingy, whatever. But I'll throw it in one last time here.
Yeah. If you want to put it in the private chat, I'll just move it into the regular chat.
Yeah, and and you could put it into the description of the video when it goes live, but I'll put it in right
sure.
there. Great.
There we go.
Yeah, and it's my, like I said, I'm proud of it. We've a few hundred people now, and it's growing, and it's my way to stay in contact with the world and say stuff. If this crazy stuff I said on camera here is not as crazy as stuff that I say privately, so we can hear some really interesting things there.
So there is Cameron's Patreon. Please do subscribe to Cameron's Patreon. It is worth it, even just for the updates on popular culture and genre fiction. Even if you're not in it, for feedback on your screenplay or your book or whatever, it's certainly worth the money. And
I try to post something every day because I'm a member of a couple Patrons. I'm like, hey, where's my post? It's like, I give you money. You post like once a month? What the hell is that, right? Right. And whereas I try to do at least once, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, but I try to do at least once a day or at least 3 or 4 times a week. But I'm pretty active. You are, and it's great stuff. So please keep it up, keep doing it, keep doing what you do, and I will go ahead and sign us out. For Kamran Pasha, it's Cardinal Sin, and we are out.